Up until that day, I thought my life was predictable, well organized, and honestly, the way life was supposed to be. Every day fell into a rhythm, a comfortable pattern I had come to depend on. My wife, Janice, and I had settled into a satisfying routine of married life with our two young sons, Ryan and Sean. Sure, the demands of parenting and my job could be a challenge, but I believed that we had the kind of marriage most people envied, a marriage built on trust, love, and an understanding that had grown with us over the years. After 7 years of marriage, I thought I knew Janice like the back of my hand. She was charming, intelligent, and beautiful, and after 2 kids, she'd managed to stay as fit and vivacious as the day we met. We still had date nights, shared inside jokes, and rarely went to bed angry. I worked as a middle manager at a large logistics company, which paid well enough for Janice to stay home with the kids. To our friends and neighbors, we seemed to have it all: a solid marriage, a cozy home, and a partnership based on respect and affection. Even now, as I think back, there didn't seem to be any major cracks in the foundation, or so I thought. But life, as they say, has a way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when I came home from work feeling a bit off. I chalked it up to the change in weather and a bit of exhaustion, nothing to worry about. As I lay on the couch, hoping a short rest would ease the nausea, I had no idea that the worst was yet to come. I parked my car in the garage, as usual, and made sure to close the door. The house was quiet when I walked in, and I flopped onto the couch, closing my eyes and willing the uneasiness away. Not long after, I heard Janice's car pull into the driveway, and then the front door opened. I didn't get up to greet her. In fact, I was in a bit of a fog, not even announcing that I was home. Janice and her sister Carla entered the house, laughing and talking as they walked into the kitchen. The couch faced away from them, so they couldn't see me, and I nearly got up to say something, but then a wave of nausea kept me down. So I lay there, listening to their conversation without meaning to. They were chatting about a new dress Janice had bought, one she was planning to wear for their annual Chicago trip. It was a tradition they'd had for the past 4 years. Janice and Carla would head to the Windy City for a weekend to see some shows, visit art exhibits, and have a girls' weekend. While they were away, Carla's husband Bob and I would stay home to watch the kids. We both figured that Janice and Carla deserved a break, and I never minded watching the kids. It felt like a fair trade. As I listened, Carla's voice rang out with a playful lilt. "Wow, that's a sexy dress, Janice. Has Jim seen it? Does he know you're taking it on the trip?" "No," Janice laughed. "If he saw it, he'd get suspicious. So don't say anything, okay? Randy's going to love it." Randy. I didn't recognize the name, and that single mention had my stomach in knots. Who the hell was Randy? I held my breath, hoping I'd heard wrong, but as their conversation continued, the pieces started to come together in the worst possible way. "Are you bringing something special for Mark?" Janice asked her sister, a teasing tone in her voice. Carla laughed. "Oh, yeah. I've got a little something hidden from Bob that will definitely get his attention." "I have some special lingerie, too," Janice said, her tone casual. "Jim hasn't seen it either. It'll really drive Randy wild." The words hit me like a freight train. I was shocked, stunned, and frozen in place, desperate for this to somehow be a terrible misunderstanding. But every word, every detail in that conversation pointed to something I couldn't ignore. My wife and her sister were planning a weekend of deception with men I'd never even heard of. The realization sank in slowly, leaving me reeling. For years, I had believed in my wife's honesty and loyalty, trusted her implicitly, and loved her with everything I had. But now, in one overheard conversation, that trust was shattered. As I lay there, too nauseous to move, the weight of what I'd just discovered sank into my bones, and my life, the life I had thought was rock solid, suddenly felt like it was crumbling beneath me. The nausea I'd felt earlier was nothing compared to the gut-wrenching realization of what I'd overheard. My mind spun, replaying Janice's words, trying to twist them into anything other than what they were. But there was no mistaking it. The way she talked about this man, Randy, and the fact that she was hiding things from me for his sake, it all pointed to something I didn't want to face. My throat felt tight, and my stomach twisted painfully as I lay there, barely able to breathe. As Janice and Carla's voices grew softer and eventually faded, I finally managed to sit up, my head throbbing. I wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers, but a deeper fear held me back. What if it wasn't just an affair? What if this betrayal went further than I could imagine? There was so much I didn't know. My mind flashed to Sean, my youngest. He was only 2, with my eyes, or so I'd always thought. I could barely keep my stomach from turning. And then, just when I thought I'd heard it all, Janice's next words shattered me even further. "Are you going back on birth control this year?" she asked Carla. "Yes," Carla replied casually, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "I only wanted one child with Mark. It's lucky he and Bob look so much alike." The nausea was immediate and overwhelming, but I stayed silent, straining to hear Janice's response. "I know what you mean," she said softly. "It's a good thing Randy and Jim have the same dark hair and build. Even Jim's mother says Sean looks just like him." A cold wave of disbelief crashed over me. I could barely process what she'd said. Could he really be another man's child? My chest tightened and bile rose in my throat. My own son. The little boy I'd loved and cherished every day since he was born. And Janice? She'd had him with someone else? She'd passed him off as mine, letting me fall in love with him without ever knowing the truth. As they left the kitchen, I bolted from the couch, barely making it to the bathroom before throwing up. The contents of my stomach emptied out in one painful heave after another, and even when there was nothing left, I kept gagging, dry heaving as the betrayal and anger gnawed at me. I stumbled out of the bathroom, grabbing my jacket from the hall closet. I needed to get out, to clear my head, to think through what I'd just heard. Every inch of my body felt tense, like I was about to break into 1,000 pieces. I climbed into the car and drove aimlessly for a while, my mind swirling with questions. How could she do this to me, to our family? How long had this been going on, and why? I couldn't wrap my head around it, couldn't see where things had gone so wrong. It felt like the life I'd known was slipping through my fingers, being replaced by a nightmare I couldn't escape. Eventually, comma. I pulled into an empty parking lot and sat in silence, trying to gather my thoughts. The reality of what I'd just heard began to settle over me, bringing with it a deep, simmering anger. As the shock faded, I felt the anger in its place, a burning need to make sense of this betrayal. I wanted answers, but I also knew that if I confronted Janice too soon, without a plan, she might twist things or find a way to cover her tracks. I pulled out my phone, debating who to call. My first thought was to reach out to Bob, Carla's husband. If Janice was doing this, there was every chance Carla was too. But I hesitated. I needed someone with a clear head, someone who could help me figure out my next steps without getting caught up in emotions. That's when I remembered Jerry Matthews, my old friend from high school and golfing buddy. He was a lawyer and had helped me navigate legal questions a few times before. I wasn't sure if I was ready to talk about divorce, but I knew I needed legal advice. Fast. I dialed Jerry's number, and after a few rings, his secretary Helen picked up. "Hey, Helen, it's Jim," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Jim, you sound terrible. Are you all right?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. I've had some really bad news, Helen. Is Jerry free? I need to see him as soon as possible," I said, the words tumbling out faster than I intended. She hesitated, but I could hear her flipping through a calendar. "Can you be here in 15 minutes? I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yes, I'll be there." I hung up and drove to Jerry's office, my mind racing. I was dreading this conversation, but I had to start somewhere. When I walked in, Helen took one look at me and gasped. "Jim, you look awful." "I feel awful, Helen. I think I'm coming down with something," I lied. It was easier than telling her the truth. She nodded sympathetically and motioned for me to go straight in. As soon as I walked into Jerry's office, he stood up, looking at me with concern. "Good God, Jim, what's going on?" I slumped into the chair, feeling the weight of everything I'd heard pressing down on me. I took a deep breath and met his gaze. "Jerry, I think I have a serious problem with Janice. I need advice. I'm not even sure what to do." He frowned, settling back into his chair. "That's hard to believe. I've known you both for years, Jim. You've always seemed like the perfect couple. What happened?" The words were hard to find. I stumbled through an explanation, telling him about the conversation I'd overheard, about the mentions of Randy and Mark, and finally, about the possibility that Sean might not be my son. Jerry's face went from shock to horror as I spoke, and he shook his head in disbelief. "I can't believe this, Jim," he said finally, his voice quiet. It's unthinkable." "Tell me about it," I muttered, gripping the arm of the chair until my knuckles turned white. "I don't know if I can forgive her, and if Sean isn't mine—" Jerry leaned forward, his expression serious. "Jim, you know I don't handle divorces, but I can refer you to a good divorce attorney who can walk you through your options. But if you're considering it, you're going to need more proof than just what you overheard, especially if you're questioning Sean's paternity." I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. I need to know where I stand legally. What would happen with the kids, the finances? Jerry held up a hand. "Slow down, Jim. Let's take this one step at a time. First, I'll set up a meeting with the divorce attorney, and in the meantime, you're going to need a private investigator. If Janice is planning a trip, it might be the perfect opportunity to get the proof you need." I agreed, my mind already racing with questions. Jerry was right. If I acted now, I might be able to catch Janice in the act. It was a bitter pill to swallow, the thought of having her followed. But I knew that if I wanted answers, I couldn't let her slip away. I needed to protect myself, protect my kids, and find the truth. Before I left, Jerry squeezed my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Jim. Whatever you decide to do, just know I've got your back." I nodded, grateful for his support. As I walked out of his office, Helen gave me a sad smile. "Take care, Jim, and call if you need anything." "Thanks, Helen," I murmured, managing a weak smile in return. As I drove home, the shock began to give way to determination. This was my life, my family, and my future on the line. Whatever Janice had done, I was going to get to the bottom of it, and if she had been unfaithful, she would face the consequences. The drive home from Jerry's office felt like a blur. My mind was spinning, replaying every conversation, every memory with Janice, trying to find a moment where I could have missed something. I felt like I was living in a fog, barely holding myself together. But I knew that until I had proof, I had to keep my head down and act as if nothing had changed. When I arrived home, I found Janice busy with the kids. She greeted me with a warm smile, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her the same way. I forced a weak smile in return, hoping she wouldn't see through it. The words I'd overheard still echoed in my mind, and every look, every gesture felt tinged with betrayal. I was operating on autopilot, doing my best to keep my emotions in check. "Jim, honey, are you feeling okay?" she asked, a hint of concern in her voice as she set down a stack of laundry. "You've looked a bit under the weather." I forced a laugh, trying to play it off. "Yeah, I think it's just a bug. Hopefully it's nothing serious." "Well, maybe you should rest up," she said, brushing a hand across my shoulder. "I hope you're feeling better by Friday. Carla and I can't wait for this trip." Her words stung, but I kept my composure, nodding as if nothing was wrong. "Yeah, I should be better by then. Wouldn't want to ruin your plans," I replied, my voice coming out colder than I'd intended. Janice glanced at me, raising an eyebrow, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she returned to her tasks, humming softly as she went about the evening routine. The casual way she acted, so at ease, so innocent, it was almost too much to bear. How could she betray me so completely and then carry on like this? Once the kids were in bed, I retreated to the garage under the guise of needing some time alone. In reality, I was finalizing my plan. I pulled out my phone and checked my messages. Jerry had sent me the contact info for Sam Ridley, the investigator he recommended. With a deep breath, I dialed the number. "Sam Ridley, Private Investigations," a voice answered, professional but friendly. "Hi, Sam. My name is Jim. Jerry Matthews referred me," I said, feeling my pulse quicken. I need some help with a personal matter." Sam's tone shifted to one of understanding. "Of course, Jim. Jerry gave me a heads up. Why don't you tell me what you need?" I explained the basics of my situation, leaving out the most painful details, but enough for him to understand. He listened patiently, then asked, "Is your wife going out of town soon? That's usually an opportunity to gather evidence discreetly." "Yes," I replied, barely able to keep the bitterness from my voice. She's leaving for Chicago this Friday with her sister. They do this trip every year. All right, Sam said. I'll arrange for surveillance in Chicago to track her movements and interactions. We'll have everything recorded, both video and stills. If there's anything to uncover, we'll find it. The call left me feeling hollow but resolute. I knew I was on the path to finding the truth, but the idea of actually seeing it, of seeing Janice with another man, made my stomach churn. Part of me wished that I would discover this was all a misunderstanding, but deep down, I knew I was clinging to false hope. The rest of the week crept by painfully slow. Each day I went to work, tried to focus, but my mind was always elsewhere, replaying that conversation over and over. I found myself dissecting every interaction with Janice, analyzing her every move, searching for any hint of remorse, guilt, or hesitation. But if she felt any of those things, she hid it well. She carried on as if everything was normal, laughing with the kids, texting Carla about their weekend plans, making dinners with that familiar smile I'd always loved. Only now, that smile felt like a lie. Wednesday evening, I found myself alone in the living room, mindlessly scrolling through my emails. Janice had already gone to bed and the house was quiet. My hand hovered over her laptop on the coffee table, a part of me tempted to search for any evidence of her betrayal. I wasn't one to invade her privacy, but desperation had taken hold of me. Before I could think twice, I opened the laptop and clicked on her email app. To my surprise, the account was password protected. I typed in a few guesses, our anniversary date, her mother's maiden name, but nothing worked. Then, on a hunch, I tried Sean's name and birthday. The screen unlocked immediately, and I felt a strange pang of anger that it had been that easy. Inside her inbox, I found a series of messages from someone named Randy. My blood ran cold. The most recent one was from just the other day, sent shortly after she'd returned from her shopping trip with Carla. I clicked on it, feeling a deep, gnawing dread. Subject. Looking forward to this weekend. From Randy Jan, just a couple of days left. I can't wait to see you. Let's make this weekend unforgettable. You know what to bring. Randy. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the thread, reading each message. They had been exchanging emails for months, every one more damning than the last. Their relationship wasn't just casual, it was an affair built on routine and secrecy. The messages contained hidden plans, hints of past encounters, and mentions of future weekends in other cities. I printed the emails, knowing I would need them if I decided to move forward with a divorce. Each page felt like a small betrayal in my hands, and by the time I'd printed everything, I could barely hold myself together. This was the woman I'd loved, the mother of my children, and she'd been lying to me for years. The next morning, I woke up with a sick feeling in my stomach. Janice was still asleep, looking peaceful and innocent in a way that felt like a cruel joke. I couldn't bring myself to lie beside her any longer. Instead, I got ready for work quietly, poured myself a strong cup of coffee, and left before she woke up. I needed space, I needed a plan, and most of all, I needed strength to get through this nightmare. When I arrived at the office, I called Sam again. Sam, I found emails, I said, my voice barely steady. I have proof. They're meeting this weekend, and it's been going on for months, maybe even years. Good work, Jim, Sam replied. Hold on to those. They'll help you in case this turns into a legal matter. In the meantime, I'll have everything set up in Chicago to capture what's happening this weekend. By the time Friday rolled around, I was a bundle of nerves, trying to keep it all together. I came home around noon to watch the kids as Janice had asked. She greeted me with her usual bright smile, but now it felt like a mask hiding a stranger. She'd dressed up, looking effortlessly beautiful in a casual way, wearing just enough makeup to make her eyes stand out. I felt a sick twist in my stomach, knowing she was dressed up for someone else. Jim, you're a lifesaver, she said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. I know you've been under the weather, so thank you for helping out. I forced a smile. Just take care of yourself out there. Oh, don't worry, she replied with a grin. Carla and I will behave. It's just a girls' weekend after all. The words felt like a slap in the face, but I nodded, feigning indifference. As she kissed the kids goodbye and grabbed her bags, I walked her to the car, watching her drive away with a smile as if nothing was wrong. I waved, watching her disappear down the street, feeling like I was watching my life unravel before me. As soon as she was gone, I called Bob. "Hey, can we meet up? There's something I need to talk to you about." "Sure, Jim," he replied, sounding a bit concerned. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "But we'll talk about it when I get there." When I arrived at Bob's house, he greeted me with a warm smile, but his expression quickly changed as he saw the look on my face. We sat down at his kitchen table and I took a deep breath, gathering the courage to tell him everything. I handed him the printed emails, and as he read through them, his face grew pale, his hand gripping the pages tightly. "Jim, I can't believe this," he said, his voice shaking. "Carla, too, with someone named Mark?" I nodded. "It's all there. I overheard them talking about it, and I've hired a private investigator to follow them in Chicago. We'll know the full extent of it soon." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of what we'd discovered settling over us like a dark cloud. "What do you want to do?" Bob finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to confront them," I said, feeling the anger rising in my chest. "But I need proof. I need to know exactly what's going on before I make any decisions." Bob nodded, his expression hardened. "I'm with you, Jim. Whatever happens, we'll get through this." As I left his house, I felt a sense of resolve. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I wasn't going to sit back and let this betrayal continue in silence. Janice and Carla had made their choices, and now, so had I. Whatever happened next, I was ready. Friday night was brutal. After Janice left, I put the kids to bed early, hoping for a quiet night to process everything. But the house felt eerily empty, and every corner seemed to echo with memories of happier times. I tried distracting myself with a movie, something mindless to drown out my thoughts, but my mind kept drifting back to Janice and what she was doing. With him, the anticipation for the investigator's report felt like a ticking time bomb. I tossed and turned all night, plagued by images of her laughing with Randy, of shared glances and secret touches. By morning, I was exhausted and barely functioning, but I knew I had to keep it together. The kids needed me, and I couldn't afford to let anything slip until I had all the facts. Saturday afternoon, I received a call from Sam. My heart pounded as I answered, bracing myself for what he might say. "Jim, we've got the first part of the footage," he said, his tone steady and professional. "Would you like to come by the office, or would you prefer I send it over?" A chill ran down my spine. It felt surreal, like watching a movie about someone else's life, but I knew I had to face it head on. "I'll come in," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. Sam's office was quiet when I arrived. He greeted me with a sympathetic nod, his face a mask of professionalism, though I could see the pity in his eyes. We captured video and photos from their check-in, along with some surveillance footage of them together at the hotel. He led me into a small, dimly lit room with a screen on the wall and handed me a remote. "You can watch everything here. Take your time." I sat down, clutching the remote, as the screen flickered to life. The footage began with Janice and Carla arriving at a Chicago hotel, wheeling their luggage with relaxed smiles. They checked in at the front desk, and moments later, 2 men joined them. Even without knowing him, I recognized Randy immediately. He was tall, well-built, and wore a smirk that made my blood boil. Janice greeted him with a kiss on the cheek that lingered just a second too long. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm as the footage continued. They walked toward the elevators, laughing and chatting like any couple on vacation. Watching her with him felt like a punch to the gut, each glance, each smile tearing into me. The scene cut to them entering their hotel room, and I closed my eyes, bracing myself. I didn't need to watch further to understand what was happening behind those closed doors. When the video ended, I sat in stunned silence, my mind reeling. There was no denying it now. Janice wasn't just cheating. She was living a double life, carefully crafted and hidden from me. I felt a surge of anger, but underneath it, a hollow sadness gnawed at me, a grief for the life I thought we had. I heard Sam's voice from the doorway. "Jim, we also have still photos if you want copies for any legal proceedings." I nodded numbly. "Please, just give me everything." He handed me a manila envelope, heavy with the weight of evidence I'd hoped never to see. I'm sorry, Jim, he said, his voice soft. I know this isn't easy. Thank you, Sam, I replied, unable to find words to express the turmoil inside me. As I left his office, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The worst had happened, and now at least I had the truth, Dot. When I got home, I stashed the envelope in my study, hidden away until I was ready to confront Janice. I didn't want to risk the kids finding it, or her discovering it before I was ready. I spent the rest of the weekend with Ryan and Sean, trying to be present for them despite the storm raging inside me. Their laughter and small, silly requests grounded me, reminding me of what mattered most. They were innocent in all of this, and whatever happened next, I would protect them. On Sunday afternoon, Bob came over. He looked as haunted as I felt, and we sat in silence for a few moments, each of us grappling with the reality of our wives' betrayal. Sam's office sent me the footage, he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. I couldn't watch it all. Just seeing her with him was enough. I nodded. I know the feeling. It's like a nightmare you can't wake up from. What do we do now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. We wait for them to come home, and then we confront them. There's no way around it. We deserve answers, and they need to face the consequences of what they've done. Bob nodded, though he looked uncertain. I don't know if I'll have the strength to do it. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together, I assured him, placing a hand on his shoulder. We'll get through this. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, going over what I would say, imagining Janice's reaction, bracing myself for whatever excuses or justifications she might try to offer. I knew that no matter what, I had to stay calm. The kids couldn't see us fighting, and I couldn't risk losing control. But the anger and betrayal seethed inside me, an unquenchable fire that threatened to consume me. When Monday morning came, I got up early, preparing myself for the day ahead. Janice and Carla's flight was scheduled to land around noon, and they'd be home by early afternoon. I busied myself with tasks around the house, anything to keep my mind occupied as I waited. Around 2 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of Janice's car pulling into the driveway. My heart pounded as I watched her step out, looking fresh and happy, carrying her bags with a casual ease that stung. She waved at me through the window, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. I met her at the door, keeping my expression as neutral as possible. Hey, honey, she said brightly, setting her bags down and leaning in for a kiss. I turned my head, letting her kiss my cheek instead. She pulled back, looking puzzled. Is everything okay? I forced a smile, ignoring the knot in my stomach. We need to talk, Janice. In the living room. Her face fell, a flicker of fear crossing her eyes. What's this about? Just come with me, I said, my tone firm. She followed me into the living room, her steps hesitant. We sat down, and I took a moment to gather my thoughts, my gaze steady on her. Janice, I know about Randy. I know about everything. Her face went pale, her mouth opening slightly in shock. For a moment, she looked like she might try to deny it, but then her shoulders slumped and she dropped her gaze. Jim, I don't know what to say. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I kept my voice level. I heard you and Carla talking the other day, and I hired an investigator to follow you in Chicago. I have video, emails. I have all the proof I need. A silence fell between us, thick with tension and unspoken words. Janice looked at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously. I never meant for you to find out like this, she murmured. My hands tightened into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. How long has this been going on, Janice? How long have you been lying to me? She hesitated, then finally looked up, her eyes filled with shame. It's been about a year. A year? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. So you've been with him, sneaking around, lying to my face for an entire year? She nodded, her face etched with guilt. Jim, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything right now, but I am. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, you did, I replied, my voice sharp. And it's not just me, Janice. The kids, they deserve better than this. Tears filled her eyes and she wiped them away quickly. I know. I was selfish. I don't even know how to explain it. You don't have to explain, I said, my voice steady but cold. I just need you to understand that this is serious. I've spoken with a lawyer and I have options. Right now I'm not sure what I want to do, but I know that things can't stay the same. Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded, the weight of her choices clear on her face. I understand. I took a deep breath, feeling the anger and hurt settling into a cold resolve. I need time to think, Janice. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that trust is gone. You've destroyed everything we built together. She looked at me, her eyes filled with regret, but I could tell she understood. There was no going back to the way things were, no way to undo the betrayal that had shattered our lives. The conversation ended in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. The life we'd known was over. And whatever came next, it would be built on the ashes of a broken marriage and a trust that could never be restored. After our confrontation, Janice withdrew into herself. The once vibrant, cheerful woman I'd known was gone, replaced by a shadow of regret and sadness. We moved through the house like ghosts, barely speaking to each other, each carrying the weight of a broken trust. The kids, thankfully, were too young to fully understand, but I could see the confusion in their eyes, their little faces puzzled by the tension hanging thick in the air. For the first few days, I was operating on pure autopilot. I woke up, took care of the kids, went to work, and returned home, each task mechanical like checking items off a list. My mind was constantly replaying everything: Janice's admission, the details from Sam's report, and the bitter reality of what my life had become. And as each day passed, my anger gave way to something else: exhaustion. The constant ache, the need to pretend, was wearing me down. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room after putting the kids to bed, Janice approached, her expression hesitant. She held 2 mugs of tea, offering me one with a hopeful look. Reluctantly, I took it, though I could barely look at her. She sat beside me, a safe distance away, and for a moment, we sat in silence, sipping our tea as if we were strangers forced together by circumstance. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Jim, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I truly am sorry for everything. I stared into my tea, struggling with my response. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her that sorry meant nothing now, but another part of me was simply too tired. I don't know if sorry is enough, Janice, I said quietly. I don't know if anything can fix this. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I understand, and I don't expect anything from you. I wanted you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I don't want to lose you or the kids. Her words struck a nerve, stirring up a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my voice steady. It's not just about you and me, Janice. This affects everything. Our family, our kids, the life we built together. I don't even know if it's possible to go back to the way things were. Janice's shoulders slumped, her face etched with guilt. I know, and I know I've put you in an impossible position, but I want to try, Jim. If there's even a small chance that we can rebuild this, I'll do anything. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with a sincerity that almost felt too late. I glanced at her, taking in the regret on her face, the tear-streaked cheeks, and the pleading in her eyes. She was remorseful, that much was clear. But remorse couldn't erase the betrayal, the months of lies and deception. After a long pause, I finally spoke. If we even attempt this, it has to be on my terms. There will be boundaries, things I need you to do to prove you're committed to fixing this. And I can't promise that I'll ever trust you again. Janice nodded eagerly, relief washing over her face. I understand. Whatever you need, I'll do it. The next day, I sat down and wrote out a list of conditions, laying out my expectations and boundaries as clearly as I could. It wasn't just about controlling her actions, it was about setting up safeguards to protect myself, to make sure that I wouldn't be left blindsided again. Each item on the list was a small step toward accountability, a way for her to demonstrate that she was serious about rebuilding what we'd lost. When I handed her the list, Janice read it carefully, her expression one of quiet acceptance. This is fair, she said softly. I'll honor all of it. And so a new chapter began, a tentative attempt at rebuilding from the ashes of what was once our marriage. But things were different now. Our interactions were stilted, guarded, as if we were both afraid to upset the fragile balance we'd established. I moved into the guest room, needing space to process everything, and Janice respected my distance, though I could see the sadness in her eyes every time she passed the closed door. For the next few weeks, we fell into a new routine. Janice was diligent in following the conditions I'd set. She checked in with me whenever she left the house, limited her contact with Carla, and kept her phone unlocked, open for me to review any time. She even took steps to rebuild trust with the kids, spending more time with them and making an effort to bring back a sense of normalcy. But despite her efforts, the betrayal still lingered in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I couldn't shake the image of her with Randy, the man she'd chosen over our family, even if only temporarily. I'd see her laughing with the kids, and the image would flash before me, a bitter reminder that she had once chosen someone else. One evening, Bob came over. He looked as tired and worn as I felt, the toll of Carla's betrayal etched clearly on his face. We sat in silence for a while, each nursing a drink, finding solace in the shared understanding of our situations. "How are things with Janice?" he finally asked, his voice low. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "She's trying. She's doing everything I've asked, following all the rules, but it's hard. I don't know if I can ever trust her again. Sometimes I wonder if staying is just delaying the inevitable." Bob nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I know what you mean. Carla's the same. She says she's sorry, that she wants to make it right, but I don't know if it's enough. It feels like we're just going through the motions." I took a sip of my drink, feeling the weight of his words. "Do you ever think about just walking away, leaving it all behind?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Every day. But then I look at Melissa and I think, maybe it's worth trying, for her sake, if nothing else." His words hit home, and I thought of Ryan and Sean, the two little boys who depended on us, who deserved a stable, loving home. The idea of splitting up our family, of putting them through the pain of a divorce, made my chest tighten. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the toll this was taking on me, the constant ache that gnawed at me every time I looked at Janice. That night, after Bob left, I sat in the quiet of the guest room, thinking about our conversation. Part of me wanted to stay, to fight for our family, to try and make things right for the kids' sake. But another part of me wondered if staying would only prolong the pain, if leaving would be the clean break we all needed. Days turned into weeks, each one bringing its own set of challenges and small victories. Janice continued to put in the effort, keeping her promises, honoring the conditions I'd set. There were moments when I could almost forget the betrayal, when things felt normal again. But those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the constant reminder of what she'd done. One evening, as I was putting the kids to bed, Ryan looked up at me with wide eyes. "Dad, are you and Mom okay? You seem different." His question hit me like a punch to the gut. I forced a smile, ruffling his hair. "We're fine, buddy. Things are just a little hard right now. But don't worry, we'll always be here for you and Sean." He nodded, satisfied with my answer, but the look in his eyes stayed with me long after he'd fallen asleep. I realized then that no matter what decision I made, I needed to do it with the kids' best interests at heart. They deserved stability, a home where they felt safe and loved. And whether that meant staying together or moving on separately, I had to find a way to make it work for them. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the choice before me. I knew that staying with Janice would mean rebuilding trust from scratch, a monumental task that would take years of work and sacrifice. Leaving, on the other hand, would bring its own set of challenges: single parenting, the pain of separation, the loss of the life we'd built together. But I also knew that whatever choice I made, it had to be for the right reasons. I couldn't let anger or resentment dictate my decision. I had to think about the future I wanted for myself and for my children, a future free from the shadows of betrayal. As dawn broke, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I would do whatever it took to protect my kids, to give them the stable, loving home they deserved. And if that meant letting go of the past, of the anger and betrayal that had consumed me, then so be it. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks I felt ready to face it, whatever it might bring. In the days that followed, the weight of my decision pressed down on me. I could feel it in every interaction with Janice, in every moment I spent with the kids, and even in the quiet hours alone. But there was a strange peace that came with the certainty of knowing what I needed to do. I had spent enough time wrestling with my emotions, and the time had come to act. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I found Janice sitting at the kitchen table, her fingers nervously twisting a napkin. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mixture of fear and hope. I took a seat across from her, feeling the tension settle heavily between us. "Janice," I began, my voice steady but firm. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about everything, about us, about the kids, and about what the future should look like. And I've come to a decision." She held her breath, her eyes fixed on me, waiting. I could see the tears already welling up, but I forced myself to continue, determined to be honest and clear. "I can't keep doing this," I said, my tone softening. "I've tried to rebuild the trust, to move past what happened, but I can't pretend that things can ever go back to the way they were. I don't want to keep putting myself or the kids through this pain." Janice's face crumpled, a soft sob escaping her lips. She looked down, her shoulders slumping, as if the weight of my words had crushed her. "I understand," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I knew this was a possibility, but I was hoping that maybe you'd give us another chance." I looked away, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "Janice, this isn't easy for me either, but I have to do what's best for myself and the kids. They deserve a home where their parents are happy, where they don't have to feel the tension in every room. And I deserve peace, something I don't think I'll ever find if I stay." She nodded, wiping her tears, her expression resigned. "What happens next?" "I've spoken with a lawyer," I replied, "and he advised me on the steps we need to take to move forward with a separation. We'll work out a custody arrangement that allows both of us to be there for the kids, and we'll figure out the financial side of things. But most importantly, I want to make this as smooth as possible for Ryan and Sean. They're my priority." Janice's face softened, and I could see her guilt and regret etched deeply into her features. "They're my priority too, Jim. No matter what happens between us, I'll always love them." I nodded, the shared love we had for our kids the only common ground we could cling to now. "I know, and that's why I think we can make this work. For them." In the days that followed, we began to take the first steps towards separating our lives. The lawyer walked us through the process, drafting a separation agreement and outlining custody arrangements. I was relieved to see that Janice was cooperative, agreeing to a joint custody arrangement that would allow the kids to split time between us. We both wanted them to feel as little disruption as possible, and that meant maintaining as much normalcy as we could manage. Telling the kids was, without a doubt, the hardest part. Ryan was old enough to sense that something was wrong, and when we sat him and Sean down together, his face was filled with a mix of curiosity and dread. Janice and I exchanged a look, steeling ourselves, and then I began. "Ryan, Sean, your mom and I have something to tell you," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Things are going to be a little different from now on. Mom and I have decided that it's best if we live in separate homes." Ryan's face fell, his eyes filling with tears. "Does this mean you're getting a divorce?" he asked, his voice trembling. I glanced at Janice, who nodded, her own eyes misty. "Yes, honey," she said softly. "But this doesn't mean we love you any less. We'll always be here for you, just in different ways." Sean didn't fully understand, but he clung to me, sensing the gravity of the situation. Ryan wiped his tears, trying to be brave, but I could see the sadness in his eyes, the worry that came with knowing his world would never be the same. It broke my heart, but I knew that, in the end, this was the best path for all of us. Over the next few weeks, Janice and I began the process of dividing our belongings and arranging our new lives. I stayed in the family home while she searched for a nearby apartment, determined to keep herself close so the kids could have a stable routine. She handled the transition with grace, staying focused on the children's well-being, and for that, I was grateful. Whatever had gone wrong between us, at least we were able to come together for their sake. As Janice moved out, the house felt emptier, yet there was a strange sense of relief in the solitude. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely. I spent my evenings with the kids, focusing on our routines, doing everything I could to bring back a sense of stability. I'd help them with their homework, take them to the park, and tell them bedtime stories. Small moments that reminded me of why I'd made the decision to let go. Once Janice settled into her new place, we began our shared custody arrangement. The kids adjusted better than I expected, though there were moments when they struggled, especially Ryan. He'd ask questions about why things had changed, and I did my best to answer honestly while protecting him from the painful details. I told him that sometimes, even when two people love each other, they realize it's better for everyone if they live apart. He accepted my words, though I could see the sadness linger in his eyes. Months passed, and the wounds began to heal. Janice and I maintained a cordial relationship for the kids' sake, coordinating our schedules and working together to make holidays and birthdays special for them. Over time, I found myself moving forward, creating a life that felt whole, even without the marriage I'd once thought was unbreakable. I leaned into my role as a father, finding joy in the little things, helping Ryan build a model airplane, teaching Sean how to ride a bike, and watching them grow stronger and more resilient with each passing day. My focus shifted from what I had lost to what I still had. Two beautiful children who depended on me, who filled my life with purpose and love. One evening, as I was tucking Ryan into bed, he looked up at me with a shy smile. "Dad, I know things have been hard, but I'm glad we're all okay." I smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Me too, buddy. And no matter what, we'll always be okay. You, me, and Sean, we're a team." He nodded, his face lighting up with a mix of relief and pride. It was moments like these that reminded me why I'd made the choices I had, why I'd fought so hard to keep things stable for them. Despite the pain, despite the heartache, I had managed to build a life that was, in its own way, whole and fulfilling. As the months turned into years, I saw Janice less frequently, our interactions limited to occasional family events and drop-offs with the kids. We both moved forward, carving out new paths, finding peace in our own ways. She eventually began dating again, and while it stirred up a mixture of emotions in me, I knew I was ready to let go. My focus was on the future, on raising Ryan and Sean to be strong, compassionate men, on creating a life that was honest and true. Looking back, I saw the lessons the experience had taught me, the strength I'd found in facing the hardest truths. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also forced me to reevaluate my values, to redefine what I wanted from life. And through it all, I had come to see that love isn't always enough to save a relationship. Sometimes love means letting go, moving forward, and choosing peace over resentment. And so I continued on, not as the man I once was, but as someone new. Someone who had faced the depths of betrayal and come out stronger, wiser, and more determined to live a life built on trust, honesty, and a love that would never waver for the ones who mattered most. Years passed, and life took on a rhythm that, while different from what I'd once envisioned, felt steady and fulfilling. Janice and I remained cordial, keeping communication focused on the kids and ensuring they felt supported and loved. Our relationship had transformed from one built on romance and dreams to something simpler, a cooperative partnership for the well-being of Ryan and Sean. And though there were moments when memories of our old life surfaced, they no longer held the same sting. The kids were growing up fast, each milestone a reminder of the journey we'd taken to get here. Ryan had turned into a thoughtful, kind young man, his resilience a testament to the strength he'd built through the challenges we'd faced together. Sean, the younger one, had a vibrant energy and an unshakable optimism that kept us all grounded. Watching them, I saw pieces of myself, pieces of Janice, and above all, two individuals who were coming into their own. One day, as I watched them playing in the yard, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Despite everything, We'd managed to create a life that was rich and whole. It hadn't been easy, but in the end we had emerged stronger, and I knew with every fiber of my being that the choices I'd made were the right ones. One evening, Ryan approached me with a question that reminded me of how far we'd come. "Dad," he began, his tone serious. "I was talking with a friend at school. His parents are divorced too, and he told me he never sees his dad. I wanted to say thank you for always being there for Sean and me." I looked at him, my chest tight with emotion. "Ryan, I wouldn't be anywhere else. You and Sean are everything to me. I'm always going to be here for you no matter what." He nodded, a look of relief on his face. "I know, Dad. I just wanted you to know I appreciate it." Later that night, after tucking the kids into bed, I found myself sitting on the back porch, gazing up at the stars. I'd come a long way since those dark days of betrayal and heartbreak. The bitterness and anger had faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance, a sense of peace that I hadn't thought possible. In those early days, I'd wrestled with resentment, with the desire to hold on to the past and dwell on what could have been. But over time, I'd learned that forgiveness, true forgiveness, wasn't about excusing what had happened. It was about releasing myself from the grip of anger and embracing a future free from the chains of the past. Forgiving Janice had been difficult, but it had also been one of the most freeing experiences of my life. I no longer saw her as the woman who had broken my heart, but as a co-parent and partner in raising our children. She'd made mistakes, just as I had. But we'd both done our best to put our children first, to ensure they had a life filled with love and support. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Eventually, I met someone. A warm, kind woman named Sarah, who understood what it meant to rebuild after loss. She had her own story, her own wounds, and together we found solace and strength in each other's company. It was a different kind of love, one built on patience and understanding, and it brought a quiet happiness I hadn't expected to find again. Sarah became a part of our lives gradually, earning Ryan and Sean's trust with her gentle presence and genuine interest in their lives. I'd introduced her to Janice as well, and while it had been awkward at first, we'd managed to navigate the situation with grace. Janice even expressed happiness for me, a gesture that underscored how far we'd come in healing old wounds. As the years went by, life continued its steady march forward. Ryan graduated high school, then Sean, each milestone a reminder of the time that had passed and the journey we'd all taken together. At their graduations, I sat beside Janice and Sarah, a blend of my old life and new, each person representing a chapter in my story. Looking back on everything, I realized that life doesn't always go according to plan. We face challenges we never anticipated, losses that threaten to shatter us. But through it all, we find ways to rebuild, to redefine ourselves, and to create a future that, while different, is no less meaningful. The pain and betrayal that once dominated my thoughts had transformed into wisdom, a deeper understanding of resilience, forgiveness, and the capacity for growth. I no longer viewed those years as wasted or lost. Instead, they were part of my journey, stepping stones that had led me to where I was now. And as I looked toward the future, I felt a sense of calm, a certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, I could face them with strength and grace. I had my children, my family, and a new love that brought me peace. My life, though marked by trials and heartache, was rich with purpose and filled with love. The stars shone brightly above, illuminating the night sky, and I took a deep breath, feeling a contentment that came from knowing I had weathered the storm and emerged stronger on the other side. Life had tested me, shaped me, and shown me that even in the darkest times, there is always light, always a path forward. And with that knowledge, I was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, secure in the love and resilience that would guide me through all of life's seasons. Here's the next story. I quit my work. That was the first and most enjoyable thing I did. Every black cloud that threatens to obscure your view has a silver lining. My superiors and coworkers were startled. I provided no rationale. Pity does not appeal to me. When I went, I left them with the image. I was pursuing my ambitions. There were meetings when they promised to increase my salary. They demanded to know who had purchased me away. I merely smiled and signed a non-compete agreement for a decent price. It's strange to see your true dollar value. On paper, it appears to be both too enormous and too small. Some things were easier for me than they would be for others in my situation. I had no close relatives, which was a blessing. My pals seemed more like acquaintances. I'd meet them for cards or movies, but we never had any deep bonding moments. They might call me to jumpstart their car or pick up the mail when they went on vacation. They knew better than to expect a shoulder to weep on when serious troubles arose. I didn't disclose mine, so I didn't expect them to either. Needless to say, no one was really upset when I packed up and relocated 3 states away. I purchased an ancient house that required extensive repairs. I'd spent many Sunday mornings watching home repair and remodeling shows. I squandered years dreaming of becoming a rehab expert. Buy, fix, and resell them. That was exactly what I wanted to do for a living. And that is how I planned to spend the rest of my life. The realtor thought I was mad. She tried to push me toward less stressful properties. She couldn't get her head around my dream. Of course, I got the place for a song, so her commission could have been her motivation to attempt to sell me something more expensive. I was the proud owner of a home that needed to be completely rebuilt. I moved in with no electricity and only one working bathroom. It was simply heavenly. My first priority was to install a new roof and upgrade the electrical system. I'd have to contract out both. I'd aid with the labor, but I wanted professionals to walk me through the crucial steps. The roofer might come out right away. However, the electrical situation was rather different. The contractors were behind schedule and expected to take 2 weeks to reach me. I increased the bid price, and someone else's energy was temporarily turned off. I didn't really care how much it cost. I knew I wanted 20-amp service as quickly as possible. The electrician would arrive in 2 days, with a 3-day installation without power. I couldn't cook, and refrigeration lasted about as long as the ice cubes in the cooler. You can only consume so many peanut butter and jelly sandwiches before your tongue revolts. I decided that eating at least 1 meal a day in town would be plenty. Junction City was a small town located outside of the normal world as I understood it. It was far enough from the city to not qualify as a suburb, but close enough. It was not the Outback, a predominantly rural population with a 4-block downtown. It would have been called quaint if you hadn't had to drive past the Pleasure Palace on the way into town, which is located on the outskirts. Before any of the residential streets, there is a rectangular metal building. It was unpleasant on its own, with its chain-link fence and flashing lights. Only the sign that read Pleasure Palace in huge letters was welcoming. A pair of stocking legs was strategically placed to emphasize the words at night, and the sign could be seen for a mile. During the day, you may drive right by and miss it. I had not been to a strip club in years when I drove past the first night. The last time I went was to a bachelor celebration for a friend about 20 years ago. I recall getting extremely intoxicated and partying with $400. All that money, yet I left as dissatisfied as the law permitted. It was still a nice memory. I had always felt the memory was superior to the night I ate at Rusty's Burgers the first night. It was a family-owned establishment with the feel of a country kitchen, down to the red and white checkered tablecloths. The waitress, a high school girl with far too many freckles, asked me what I was doing in Junction City. It was a small town, so I assumed good gossip was worth its weight in gold. I realized there was only one secret worth keeping anymore and revealed the others to her. I got a free slice of apple pie for dessert, a warm greeting to the town slice. I graciously accepted and began to appreciate the casual mood they created. The pie was delicious. When it comes to making apple pie, most people avoid using sugar and cinnamon, not Rusty's. It was sinfully delicious, with tart apples balanced by adequate amounts of diet-busting sugar and cinnamon. Sleep was pleasant because the weather had held. I knew I wouldn't be lucky for long, so I prayed for nature to cooperate until the power came on. I already had a new furnace in the basement, anxiously waiting for energy and ductwork. The next day, I made holes in the first floor and installed the necessary ductwork. I'd have to install another unit in the attic for the second floor. As soon as the power was turned off, I would become concerned. It was an antique house that appeared to dislike contemporary conveniences. I would try to combine it with the future as much as possible. I was fatigued by 3 o'clock. It had been a long since I had done any physical labor. Working with your hands over your head might be quite taxing if you're not used to it. I showered and decided to eat an early dinner. I was greeted by name when I walked into Rusty's. I had the same waiter and dinner, but this time I paid for my slice of pie. Since I was now a regular, I received an abundance of information about the impending harvest festival. I suppose the waitress felt it important to keep me informed. I grinned as I read her name tag, Diana. I tried to commit that to memory. I liked the food and hoped to return. Remembering names appears to be a pastime in town, so I felt compelled to partake. On the way back, driving into the burning sun, I couldn't pass by the pleasure palace. It was early, yet I was not exhausted, without power. There wasn't much to keep me engaged at home. I figured spending a few hours in a strip club would be more interesting. I'm not sure what I expected, but the reality was very different. I walked from the bright, beautiful day into a nearly pitch-black prison. I took off my spectacles, believing the lenses had darkened during the walk from the car. Unfortunately, the view was no better. A flare from behind me disrupted my slowly adjusted eyes. "Hello?" It was a nice voice from a woman who had just entered behind me. I questioned if she was a dancer at first, but her demeanor suggested more authority. The door rapidly shut, and I was blind again. I could tell her name was Maddie. It was lighted on her buttocks and written in white on black boy shorts. The black lights made it difficult to see. I was given a beacon to follow. It was great to watch the M and Y change elevations as she made her way to the lone, brightly lit spot in the building. I almost looked away shyly, but I stopped myself. "You are in a strip club, moron. You are expected to look." I appreciated the scenery as it accelerated. Her eyes were plainly better than mine. I was just beginning to notice the bottles on the lighted shelf when I stumbled into a dark fabric chair. I slipped behind it and went to the brightest spot in the big room, the bar. As I got closer, my vision improved significantly. I looked around and realized that the area was almost completely deserted. There were chairs for roughly 50 people arranged around a long stage that stretched across the center of the room. There was another set of unoccupied chairs on the other side of the aisle that ran around the stage chairs but were against the wall. I knew it was early, but I didn't expect to be the only guy there. I was never suited to center stage. I considered skipping the whole affair and leaving before I became uncomfortable. I ignored such thoughts, assuming I knew how to drink without embarrassing myself. I grabbed a stool at the bar and was pleased to see Maddie behind it. "May I get you a drink?" She slid straight up. There wasn't nobody else to serve. Her blonde hair was pushed back and secured with something invisible. She had a nice face and a bigger physique than you'd expect for someone dancing on a pole. She had no idea that I would have tipped handsomely only to see her dance. She had a flow about her that oozed sexuality. I stared at the wall of bottles, hoping it would help me pick what to drink. I reverted to something I drank years ago. I believe I'll just drink a rum and coke. I don't believe I was staring at her when I talked. I knew I had a propensity to do that when I was uncomfortable, so I chastised myself. At the end of the bar stood a stunning tall blonde with a beautiful figure. I knew it was great because she was wearing a bikini that would not be appropriate for most beaches. I didn't like her right away and tried not to catch her attention. Women like her belonged on a shelf covered in plastic. They were rarely warm, even when they gave me the time of day. In my opinion, it was little more than visual candy. She was taller than me anyway. Luckily, Miss Perfect was flirting with what appeared to be the establishment's manager. Maddie reappeared with my rum and coke, grabbing the 20 I had left on the bar. "That will cost $7. Throughout the talk, she made eye contact, and I hardly remembered that I had intended to do the same. She returned with change, and I tried to say thank you to make contact. She returned my smile and went back to the corner with Miss Perfect. I understood I was disrupting dinner when I saw the styrofoam containers open and forks at work. I spun my comfortable bar stool around to peer down the long stage. Very little had changed. The place was dead, but I could tell I wasn't the only one. A couple of men were sitting in the nice velvet chair, sipping cocktails. There were a couple of flat-panel TVs about angles that showed what appeared to be a Little League game. I believed it was a regional or national championship as the summer came to a conclusion. I wasn't sure if viewing that was worth the $7 I had just paid on the drink. If Miss Perfect were the only dancer here, I would have more fun attempting to pole dance myself. A DJ concealed somewhere announced that the stunning Rebecca would be on stage. Miss Perfect down her fork, closed her styrofoam supper container, and went carelessly to the stage dot. She was not my type, although she was well built. I moved my bar stool and watched the girl move as well as she appeared to. She had flawless plastic breasts that defied gravity. Her hips undulated in a sensual fashion. If I were still a teenager, I would have given my life for her. She remained eye candy, very attractive to look at, but should be kept at arm's length. The other two patrons had different ideas. They both took to the stage seats and started tipping dollar notes. I observed her encourage them to run their hands over her body and breasts. I briefly pondered if her breasts were as hard to touch as they appeared. I decided that it was not worth the money to find out. I'd just be happy with the free view. I returned to the bar and offered my empty glass to Maddie. She smiled and began preparing me a fresh drink. The bar featured a mirror behind the bottles, allowing me to see the show without turning around. Miss Perfect was fiddling with her fork, attempting to lure more money from her fans. It appeared to be functioning. Are you having fun? Maddie inquired as she set the new drink in front of me, collected the empty one, and took $7 from what I had in front of me. Well, I admitted that I am not bored. I wasn't pleased with my decision to visit, but I wasn't ready to leave yet. Is it always so quiet? We pick up once the sun goes down, Maddie responded. She did not quickly return to the corner of the bar. I assumed this indicated she was willing to discuss. Are any other girls dancing today? Or do I need to wait for the vampires? I said it in a joking tone. I don't think she cared about the humor. The majority of the guys like Rebecca. Maddie responded by pointing at the stage with the bar rag in her hand. I let my gaze follow the cloth back to the stage. Rebecca was pushing her bikini bottoms to the side, hoping to attract more money. I returned with a sarcastic grin. I know I don't look like the type of person who would be choosy, but she's a little too Barbie for me. I said, Maddie laughed. I don't think she expected someone like me to make that comment. I grinned and took another sip from my drink. I noticed Maddie was making the drinks quite stiff. I suppose this helped loosen the clients' wallets. Maddie exclaimed cheerfully, I've never heard Rebecca described that way. She's a great girl, though, not as you'd expect. I detect a sales pitch. I simply shook my head. Nah, I'd rather talk to you, I said. I noticed her cringe at the comment. Only I could overstep in a strip club. Maddie was quite clear. I don't dance, and my clothes stay on when you tip. I was astonished by the animosity I felt at the end of her statement. I lifted my hand to surrender. I didn't intend anything by it. I should have kept my mouth closed, I said, spun my chair around and stared blankly at the stage. I thought I'd finish my drink and get out of there. It was a terrible notion from the start. This is an excellent example of why I have acquaintances rather than friends. My mouth was always faster than my intellect, and people frequently misconstrued my words. It took me roughly half a minute to finish my drink. I was relieved it wouldn't be a long commute home. I decided I'd outgrown strip clubs. I placed my glass on the bar and left a $6 tip. My manner of apologizing for the unintentional offense. Life was too brief to allow a situation to go beyond what was necessary. I was almost at the entrance when a massive linebacker emerged from behind a dark counter. I assumed he doubled as a DJ and bouncer. At first, I believed he was just leaving his booth, but he blocked my exit. Excuse me, I said respectfully, and moved to pass him. He grasped my arm, not as firmly as he could, but gently enough to stop me. Maddie wants to speak with you, he continued, indicating to the bar. When I looked back to the bar, Maddie was gesturing for me to return. I returned my gaze to the mountain in front of me inside. Look, I'm simply trying to leave. I gave a good tip. She'll just have to accept it as my apology. I expressed my hope that this would not be blown out of proportion. I was astonished that he let go of my arm. Okay, but I believe she wants to apologize to you, he remarked, stepping aside so I could pass. Maddie waved me back into the bar. Shit, I thought. Now I had to go back. I drew a deep breath and began the long walk back to the bar. I suppose I misinterpreted you. Maddie apologized. I was mistaken, and I would want to buy you a drink. I don't want you to leave furious at us. She gave me a phony smile. I could see she was not used to apologizing. The $6 was still on the bar, and a fresh drink awaited. I considered just taking her apology and going dot. There was nothing here that particularly appealed to me. Maddie wasn't even attractive anymore. The math became easy when I factored in the dark abode I would return to. Okay, I suppose we did got off on the wrong foot. I smiled and sat back down. I thank you for the drink. This is a lovely gesture. Maddie's smile became real, dot. She simply nodded and walked back to the end of the bar. Business was business, and I am confident they had me sized up for more than $20. Miss Perfect concluded her set and received the money from the stage. I watched in the mirror as she meticulously reconstructed her outfit and walked off stage in her heels, dot. She was making a beeline toward me, and I would rather she didn't. I noticed Maddie out of the corner of my eye. Say goodbye to her. Rebecca received the signal and changed directions. I suppose Maddie and I now understand each other. When the DJ revealed Lucia, a new dancer, I felt no pain. I swiveled my chair a little too far and gazed at the stage, dot. An olive-skinned woman with thick black hair streaming down her back mounted the steps. She was dressed in flowing, translucent silks in various colors of pink. Fleetwood Mac's Gypsy began to play over the sound system. Lucia began twirling, allowing the silk to expand and doing a Stevie Nicks impression. Her face was maturer than Miss Perfect's, and her contours were more feminine, dot. At least what I could see were silken wings flying around. She's not a Barbie doll, Maddie murmured from behind me. When I looked back, Maddie thrust my $6 at me and pointed to the stage. I grinned and pushed the cash back to her. You can't spend it in the grave, I thought. I winked at Maddie and took a seat beside the stage, dot. Lucia had already lost several of her silky garments. Lucia approached me as I sat down, and she gave me a small, private performance. My eyes were level with her feet. A little patch of four-leaf clovers was tattooed on her right ankle. When I gazed up into her eyes, there was no trace of Irish. I assumed Hispanic. Lucia draped one of her silken wings around my neck, and it remained there. As she took a step back, she revealed even more of herself. I was alone on the stage. The others presumably blew their wads on Miss Perfect. Lucia quickly spun around the pole in the center, leaving the rest of her silks behind. She returned to me wearing a dark pink bikini with what appeared to be genuine breasts, dot. When she leaned over her lips close to my ear, I was completely taken in by her beauty. Tipping is customary, she whispered with a little accent and smiled. The smile was quite adorable. I chuckled briefly, buzzing, and realized where I was. I took a 20 and placed it on stage. That gave me a larger smile, dot. She lay on her side, bumping into me and grasping my hand. She massaged herself as I ran my hand up her leg, along her hips and upper stomach. She directed my hand to her breast and helped me squeeze it through the fabric. It was real, not a hard silicone replica. Untie me, Lucia muttered and let go of my hand. I removed the strands of the two wrapped knots that secured her top in place, dot. She rolled her body and teased me. I appreciated the private performance and grinned as I watched her belly move to the music. This woman's curves were fueled by muscle. Some idiot sat down on the other side of the stage, and Lucia's eyes shifted to him. I knew where I was, but unwarranted jealousy seeped into my thoughts. I kind of wanted Lucia for myself, but my sense of being special was fading. Her gaze returned to mine, and she lowered her arm. She took my hands in hers and slid them up her sides, almost tickling them. Even though I realized it was all an illusion, I was excited because she could do it on cue. I'll be right back, Lucia promised, smiling. I saw her dance over to the other patron. I admit I was feeling selfish and didn't want to share. I knew it was not part of the strip club experience, but I brewed it regardless. I took my drink and sat away from the stage and the bar to pout a little. After a few minutes, I was laughing at myself. I thought I was bonding with an onstage stripper, but all she wanted was my wallet. The booze was getting to my head, and I was allowing the fantasy become a little too real. I saw Lucia return to where I was seated and grimace before taking a few more dollars from the intruder, dot. At the very least, my 20 influenced her ideas. She was a beautiful woman. I admired how she moved her curvaceous hips and how her calf muscles carried her boldly in the heels she was wearing. Lucia's words came to a conclusion, and she moved off stage toward the DJ booth, which I assumed was nearby. I started to ponder leaving again. I didn't know what to expect when I came here, but I wasn't as thrilled as I should have been. Everything seemed a little superficial, and I only had a little period of titillation. I felt more at ease at Rusty's, and the discussion was better. I had just finished my drink when Lucia approached. She was wearing the same pink bikini top, but with a silky sarong wrapped around her waist. She sat in the chair next to mine and gently stroked my thigh. Lucia remarked, showing me pouty lips. I chose to react with the truth. There was no reason for me to pretend to be something else here. In that regard, I am selfish, did not want to share, I said, attempting not to sound too inebriated. It had been a while since I had consumed a lot of rum. Her hand went up my thigh. The feeling was also pleasant. I'm here now, Lucia replied, smiling. You have my entire attention. I thought about it for a second. I liked the notion, but I realized it was a mistake to believe it was anything more than a one-sided business relationship. At least in terms of profits. Time was too brief. I decided to just hold on to the illusion for a long. Now. This makes me happy. I smiled. May I get you a drink? I knew I could. It was one of many methods to empty my pocketbook. It did not matter in the grand scheme of things. It wasn't like I needed money for retirement anymore. Sure. Lucia reacted by waving Maddie over. I ordered another rum and coke, but this time with a glass of water. Lucia requested some kind of fruit drink. I suspected it was alcohol-free, and she'd split the bill with the bar. I was cheerfully cynical. So do you have any children, Lucia? I asked. She was surprised by the question. This is not something a guy with a lady's hand on his thigh would ordinarily ask. I decided I wanted to have a normal discussion with a beautiful female. I've got a female. Lucia grinned. I noticed some pride in her dark eyes. I work here to support her through college. That caught me by surprise. She simply did not appear old enough. Either she is a prodigy, or you are a little older than you appear, I said with some whimsy. I was extremely into the rum. I felt her hand tighten around my thigh. No, my baby is smart, but not very smart. Lucia switched into mom mode. I found it endearing. She will be the first college graduate in my family. Her eyes lit up as her hand left my thigh and she began animating her words with her hands. She is unsure whether she wants to be a lawyer or an English teacher. She's only a sophomore, so she still has some time to make a decision. I was overjoyed that she got accepted. My mother cried. She even received a partial scholarship because she plays viola in the orchestra. I can tell you this, she will not be a professional dancer. Not if I have any say in it. Lucia's accent became more noticeable as she spoke. I'm hoping she'll meet a great person there, someone with a similar education to her. I don't want her worrying about rent and struggling in life like I do. She had a difficult childhood and deserved more than I gave her. She sounds wonderful, I remarked. Maddie arrived with our drinks and threw Lucia a frown. I suspected the talk was heading toward a private dance. I paid for the drinks and generously tipped, believing Maddie would let it go for now. Is Maddie the owner? I questioned Maddie, who appeared to have control of the situation and could offer the free drink without consulting. Yes, Lucia replied gently. She is a good supervisor, perhaps a little forceful. Lucia returned her hand to my thigh and rubbed it up and down. She stated hesitantly, We have private dances here. I believe talking about her daughter and lap dances did not go well together in her mind. How much? I asked. 20th song? Lucia answered a little more enthusiastically. I reached into my wallet and counted out 200 for the next 10 songs. I said we could converse without worrying about money. I took a sip of water, hoping to balance out the alcohol. Want to pay me to talk? Lucia asked incredulously. Yep. I just want to talk to a pretty woman, I said, smiling. Unless that seems too kinky to you. Lucia smiled as I explained the proposition. I had decided that nude jugs are enjoyable, but only if it didn't end there. Since things had to end, I might as well go for companionship because money was no longer an issue. Lucia carried my money to the bar, and I observed Maddie shrug her shoulders and nod. I believe they were talking about my peculiar fetish. Lucia returned and extended her hand. We still get the private room, Lucia explained. I let her assist me get out of the seat and get my water. She led me over the stage and up a set of steps. We reached the end of the hall, and she pushed a curtained door aside. There was only one little table and a bed in the room. Lie down, kinky boy, Lucia remarked as she took my drink and placed it on the table. I laid on my back, resting my head on a tiny throw pillow. Lucia laid next to me on her side, her fingers touching my chest. "So, what do you want to talk about?" Lucia asked suspiciously. I wanted to listen rather than speak. "You told me about your daughter. I attempted to get her going again. I can't believe you are old enough to have a daughter in college." "I had her when I was 17. Lucia spoke softly. "It was an accident. You know, drinking at a gathering, and the person fled as soon as he found out. My mother and I reared her. As a result, I was unable to complete high school. That's why I'm going to make sure Sophia finishes college." Lucia's fingers pushed my shirt up and tucked it into my slacks. I was about to stop her when I felt a hand on my belly. It was enjoyable, so I didn't say anything. "Do you work every day?" I asked. "Nope, I'm off on Wednesdays and Thursdays. What is your name?" "Strange man who only wants to speak," Lucia inquired as her warm hand massaged my stomach. "Todd, strange woman who agreed to speak," I responded, trying to be witty. Her fingers slid up my side, making me shiver. Todd, "What do you do for a living?" Lucia asked, her hand moving across my chest. Her hand was really smooth and warmed my flesh. I was loving the caressing more than I expected. "I used to be a bond broker," I said. "Now I'm attempting to renovate a house. You must be wealthy to afford such extravagant chats." Lucia grinned as she ran her fingers across my stomach just above my belt. Her efforts grabbed my interest. I did not stop her since it was pleasant. I was allowing the rum to do the thinking. I slipped my arm under her head and drew her in closer, like if she were my girlfriend. "I suppose you could say I am wealthy this year," I replied cryptically. "I did have a lot of money to spend because the future will take care of itself. There's no family." Lucia quit. The conversation was becoming more about me. I wanted to return it to her. "Nope. I do have a relative who I haven't seen in 20 years, I said, then attempted to resume the conversation. "Tell me about your mama. Nothing much to say. She works hard at the same hospital where she started 30 years ago. She does clothes and cleans the rooms. Never misses a day at work. That's my mama." I liked the way she said mama. It slid off her mouth with a slight Hispanic accent. "So what are your plans once your daughter has graduated?" I inquired as Lucia's fingers touched just beneath the waistline of my jeans. I involuntarily took in a breath. She smiled as I responded. "Ticklish?" Lucia commented as she went behind her neck to unhook the top strings of her bikini. "I haven't thought that far ahead. I've only had one objective since she was born." Lucia grinned as she pulled the bikini cups away from her breasts. "I know you enjoy my humor. You are permitted to play with them while we talk, you understand?" I reached over with my free hand to caress her. "I'll have to work here for a few more years to pay off Maddie," Lucia explained. "Then I won't need so much money. I'm not sure, maybe waitressing or anything." "Do you owe Maddie any money?" I asked. That realization astonished me. My gaze never left her jokes. It felt great in my less-than-sober hands. Lucia revealed that she loaned me money to pay Sophia's tuition. She does not charge me interest, but I pledge to work here till it is paid off. Lucia's hand slipped farther into my pants, never touching my developing erection, but sending pleasant twinges its way. "I figure I'll be here another 4 or 5 years. It would be less if all of the consumers choose to have lengthy talks." She laughed. It was a nice version of indentured slavery. Maddie was keeping Lucia locked in by exploiting her daughter's future as there was little interest. It was not predatory, but it did smell terrible on the surface. "You enjoy being touched," Lucia noticed. She sat up and helped me take off my shirt. I did not fight it. I was in a rum fog, and she was correct in her view. Lucia unfastened the bottom pair of strings on her top and tossed it to the floor. She climbed on top of me and lay on my chest, her gaze only a few hands away from mine. "Why did you decide to stop becoming a broker?" Lucia asked. Her jugs felt great against my chest. It had been a long time since a woman had paid so close attention to me. "Too long," I concluded. "I've always wanted to renovate ancient houses," I replied, my gaze shifting between her eyes and her stunning cleavage. I guess I thought it was now or never. I omitted out the underlying reason for the employment change. I have indicated that pity did not appeal to me. Lucia's leg wormed between my legs, causing pleasant friction. Lucia's lips touched my ear. I could hear her breathing, practically sighing, and it tickled my ears. In my slightly drunk state, I felt an imminent eruption between my legs. My hands were exploring her sides and back. Lucia. I'm becoming very enthusiastic, I mumbled. You need to quit. Lucia's lips caressed my ear lovingly. Lucia comforted me with a kiss on my neck. The sensations were too intense. I put my hand under her hair and clutched her tightly as I began to spasm. Lucia. Lucia, I called gently, trying to stop but not wanting to. My hips started bucking, and that delicious feeling filled my crotch along with an indecent amount of warm moisture. She held me through it, kissed my neck, and saying everything was okay when it was finished. I didn't realize my muscles were so taut and relaxed. My thoughts let go of the darkness that lingered at the edges. Something had changed when the present replaced my bleak future. I was happy, at least for the moment. I was genuinely happy. Sorry, Lucia replied, lifting her head away from my neck. It appeared that you needed it. I knew the travel home would be uncomfortable. I knew it wasn't my desire to let things escalate that far. I also knew she was correct. I didn't need it. I determined I would not return to the pleasure palace. Lucia's fantasy was too wonderful, and attempting to recreate it would be a waste of time. I stretched the boundaries in an attempt to complete the fantasy. I brought Lucia's lips to mine and kissed her. I'm not sure what I really expected from the kiss. Maybe a smack or a knee in the groin. I just knew in my slightly inebriated state. I wanted to kiss my fictional sweetheart. She startled me and kissed me back. Her warmth went through me again as she added desire with her lips. I enjoyed the kiss as much as my previous release. It was fantastic and I was able to forget myself again. Lucia stated, I usually don't do that. When she finally broke the kiss, I could tell she was astonished at herself. She sat up, physically signaling the end of our affair. I just laid there, satisfied with a foolish grin, watching her jugs jiggle with her motions. She gave me a weird expression like one of concern. You realize this is a strip club, right? She asked. I imagined she wanted to make sure I wasn't falling for her. Little did she realize that I didn't have time to fall for anyone. Yes, I responded. My insides are still feeling great, and you are an excellent dancer and maybe the best conversationalist I have ever met. I smiled to alleviate Lucia's worries. She laughed, and it astonished me how much I liked it. When she laughed, her eyes brightened up, and little crinkles appeared around the edges. I sat up and examined the dark spot between my legs. I remarked it might be a little awkward to walk out of here. I kept smiling to make sure she didn't feel awful about it. I wasn't sure why I was concerned. It is dark downstairs. Nobody will know, Lucia replied with a devilish smile. However, you may have to hurry to your automobile. I laughed at that. She helped me put my shirt back on and drew me to my feet. I helped her tie her bikini top and touched her more than was required. Her olive skin was incredibly silky, and she had a wonderful musky odor. I had no idea what the perfume was, but it was subtle and would linger in my mind for the following few days. Here, I responded, reaching for my wallet. This is for Sophia. I tipped Lucia $100. You can't bring it with you after all. She appeared hesitant to take it. I wasn't sure how long I should keep it out for her. You quote, not returning, are you? Lucia asked. She was much deeper into my psyche than I realized. I suppose she noticed that in the way I tipped. You were fantastic, but no, I won't be back, I said, trying to seem serious. This place does not feel like me, if you know what I mean. Lucia grabbed the money and hugged me. It was a deep, friendly hug. She took my hand and guided me downstairs to the front entrance. She said farewell and kissed me on the cheek before sending me on my way. It was the last time I had expected to see Lucia, my beautiful, ideal girl. The roofers and the electrician arrived the next morning. I had a pounding headache that I wished was due to a hangover, but I knew better. The physicians had warned me to expect them and had prescribed strong painkillers. I determined not to take the tablets unless I became unable to function. I did not want to lose contact with reality unless absolutely necessary. I let the roofers do their work and lent my labor to Frank, the electrician. He was a bulky man, one of those guys you'd expect to see swigging a beer at the neighborhood sports pub. Fortunately for me, he was an extremely efficient electrician. His motions were quite efficient, and he didn't have to spend a lot of time analyzing what needed to be done. We walked through the house once, and I explained which appliances I planned to install where. When we were finished, He had rough designs of where all the lines would be drawn and how to best incorporate the new service into the home. I spent the day carving grooves in plaster to prepare for the new service. The house was built before electricity was considered, so we had to improvise to get service into the rooms. The downstairs was easier because the wires could be routed through the basement. The upstairs needed to be modified further. I tried to leave as much plaster on the walls as possible. I could have torn everything out and replaced the slats with drywall, but I liked how the plaster gave the house a warm appearance. My thoughts kept returning to Lucia throughout the day while I worked. She seems to have had a greater impact on me than I had realized. She was simply a gorgeous stripper. I reminded myself over and over. I was amused by my disagreement with myself. There was no way I could have a relationship, especially with a stripper. I returned to work with a vengeance. My headache had cleared up before lunch, which made me glad. The following day went better than the day before. No headache. I'd mastered wire pulling, and the roofers were finished by midday. My thoughts continued to travel to Lucia. I had no idea why I was so focused on her. I suppose it was because she was the last lady I'd had personal contact with. Probably the last female I'd ever have any sort of relationship with. It saddens me a little, but I've known it long enough to let it go. I spent the afternoon booking a plumber for next week. The electrician was not going to return until the inspectors arrived to let us connect to the grid. The inspector was not available until Friday, which was 2 days away. So much for my 3 days until power dream. I ate another early meal at Rusty's. Diana told me what was going on and asked how the rehab was doing for such a young girl. She was surprisingly gregarious and articulate. Unfortunately, you cannot buy shares in a person's future. Diana was going to succeed in life. I vowed again to think about attending the Harvest Festival. I was pleased to discover that the apple pie remained constant day after day. Diana's complimentary sample on the first day paid off handsomely for Rusty. I had a strange thought while driving home. Knowing the future enables you to do things you would not ordinarily do. Things you wouldn't have considered before. It was ridiculous, selfishly humorous, and pretty mad. There was no reason to save my money. So, I made a decision. What the hell? I drove into the pleasure palace knowing it was Lucia's day off. Maddie greeted me with a friendly smile, perhaps hoping I would become a regular. Lucia is off today. Maddie stated, I think I have someone else you might like. Actually, I just wanted to talk to you. I replied with a grin, and not in the most basic sense. I included it to quell any rage Maddie might be feeling. She saw the comedy and gave me a week. I dropped enough money the last time, so she decided to be kind and listen. What amount does Lucia owe you? I inquired with a serious expression. The grin on Maddie's face was worth the effort. Her eyes widened and she struggled to form words. I believe that is between Lucia and myself. Maddie stammered in response. Are you dating her or something? Nope. I haven't seen her since that first night and do not intend to see her again, I replied, smiling. I love Maddie's look of sheer perplexity. I simply want to pay it off. What amount does she owe you? Are you insane? Maddie asked rhetorically. You'd known her for about 2 hours. How much? Maddie? I asked again. Maddie replied, 18,000. She'll simply borrow more next term. Why the hell would you do this? Because I can, I explained as I took out my checkbook. I started filling out a check. And you believe me? It's 18 and I'll tell her you paid it back, Maddie asked incredulously. Yeah. If you were a bitch, you'd have charged interest, I replied with a big smile. What is your last name? Maddie. Make it out to Magdalene Johnson. Maddie responded, And what do I tell Lucia? Tell her that you have a compassionate heart. Tell her that money fell from the sky. I don't care what you say to her, I said, and realized I meant it. I was only providing Lucia options. Everyone ought to have a choice. You know I'm going to wait for this to clear, Maddie explained. I am confident you are certifiable. Thank you, Maddie, I murmured while handing her the check. She shook her head as she accepted it. Trust me, she can use it better than I can, I added sincerely. Are you certain you want to leave? I will buy you another drink, Maddie questioned, smiling. In an unsuccessful attempt to retrieve the rest of my wallet, I simply laughed and shook my head. I felt great as I exited the pleasure palace for the last time. There were few moments in my life when I was truly helpful to someone. I could at least look back on this incident with some pride. Lucia had made me feel better twice. I needed small miracles like that. I had another migraine Thursday afternoon. This one took me some time because I hid from the sun. In the morning, I worked on removing the previous coats of paint off the wood siding. When the migraine subsided, I attacked the siding with increasing zeal. I really wanted to finish this house. I probably should have chosen a smaller one, but this one had personality. I had a mental picture of how it would look once completed. The real estate agent didn't see it, but she lacked vision. Friday was a remarkable day. The inspector arrived on schedule and permitted the electrician to make the connection to the grid. I shamefully shouted, "Let there be light!" I plugged in one of the few lamps I owned, Dot. The glowing bulb was a stunning sight. I dashed to the kitchen, plugged in the small college dorm refrigerator I had purchased, and heard its compressor hum. I inserted a bulb into the temporary socket in the ceiling and flipped the switch. Blessed light illuminated the room. I turned the switch on and off several times. I'm overjoyed at such a small occurrence. I could now work outdoors during the day and indoors at night. It was glorious. Saturday morning I felt great. I just had one side of the house to scrape, and I still had power. I installed a set of speakers in the window and connected them to my phone. I turned the app to random shuffle, and Sultans of Swing kicked in loudly. My nearest neighbors were a quarter-mile down the road, so it was my world and my sounds. I was singing along terribly as I went to work on the siding using power equipment. I'm not sure how humans survived when electricity wasn't even a dream. I felt like a monarch, blasting through the layers of paint with mechanical speed. I had done a quarter of the side and was repositioning the ladder when a red pickup truck came into my dirt driveway. I reached into the window and paused. Layla. Maybe my neighbors were closer than I realized. No one got out of the truck and the sun was glinting off the windshield, so I couldn't tell who was inside. I proceeded nearer the car, removing my dust mask and attempting to remove some of the paint dust off my clothes. I should not have been startled when Lucius emerged from the driver's door, but I was. I truly wasn't ready to see her again. I stopped walking ahead and gazed, trying to think of something to say, Dot. Her black hair was knotted in a ponytail, with a few stray strands hanging in front of her ears. Her expression was perplexing and must have resembled mine. I think she wasn't sure what to say either. I decided to proceed again. How did you find me? I requested that we break the ice. I believe I overemphasized the difficulty. I ate breakfast at Rusty's. Lucia answered. There are no secrets in a tiny community, not with individuals like Diana going about. Why did you do this? She inquired with a touch of difficulty. I paused approximately 20 feet away. That felt like the right space for us. I started to feel silly since I didn't have a decent reason. At least, not one that she would understand, Dot. Sorry. You seem to need it, I said softly. It sounded better in my head than it did on my lips. Lucia placed her hands on her hips and attempted to say something twice, but did a better job than I did holding it in. She ended up simply shaking her head. This is a gift for you and Sophia. I pleaded, Dot, do not inquire why. I wished Maddie was more of a bitch and claimed it was from her. I simply wasn't prepared to back up my ridiculous decisions. People don't behave like that, Lucia shouted. I felt her rage pour over me. It struck me by surprise, so I took a step back. I was never good at getting shouted at, Dot. My defenses kicked in. It helped me feel better. I yelled back. Until now. I finished with more venom than was required. I regretted it as soon as I noticed the shift in Lucia's expression. I thought she was going to cry. Then she jumped back into her pickup and closed the door. I took a couple more steps back. For some reason, I believed she planned to run me over, Dot, instead, She drove away at a furious speed. I kicked myself for being an idiot. Just another reason to shun people completely. I didn't turn on the music when I got back to the siding. My happiness had vanished, and I wanted time to reflect. Fortunately, I could get it out on the old paint. I moved the ladder, ascended to the top, and then pulled too hard on the power cord, Dot. It, split from the extension cord, which has fallen on the ground. I was furious and almost threw the sander. Why did I repay that awful woman's debt? Why did I care if it annoyed her? I took a few long breaths and gently descended the ladder. I connected the two power wires together and then plugged their ends together, Dot. It would take more than just a pull to separate them now. I sat on my bum on the grass, wondering why I was feeling so bad. It took me 15 minutes to ascend the ladder again. This time, I put on the music and let Clapton to transform my mood. The work helped, and I started to forget how horrible I felt. The old paint absorbed the majority of my self-disgust. I brutally murdered years of paint layers. It wasn't long until I was humming along with the music again. I hoped I did not make Lucia weep. It took all morning to finish that side of the house. It looked considerably better than the other sides I had completed manually. When the red pickup returned, I was thinking about redoing the manual sides with the power sander. My stomach flipped in the morning. Pains returned with the truck. I told myself to keep it civil and get it over with. I would let her yell at me till it was over and I could move on with my life. I had very little of it. I paused the music and approached the pickup with reluctance. Lucia exited the truck carrying a picnic basket. Her eyes were red, but she forced a grin. I'm guessing she was also done yelling. "I made your lunch." She spoke in an even tone. She was awaiting a response. "You do not owe me anything," I replied stupidly. My mouth was once again faster than my mind. "Let me prepare your lunch." Lucia stammered and almost pleaded. I noticed the strain in her eyes. It pained her. I pretended that what I'd done didn't matter. My empathy struck back at me. "Actually, I am starving." I stated it with a smile. Anything in that basket had to be better than the canned spaghetti I was going to cook up. Lucia, quote, his expression brightened, and so did my spirits. We moved to the porch stairs. This was the closest thing I had to furniture. "This is my table right now, at least till I finish the kitchen." I apologized. "It's lovely," Lucia lied. She put a tiny cloth on the porch and arranged dishes, utensils, and 2 cups. She placed a wrapped sandwich on each dish and took out a round plastic tray containing freshly cut carrots, broccoli, and cauliflower. A little dish in the center contained what appeared to be ranch dressing. Lucia absent-mindedly dipped a carrot and tossed it into her mouth while pulling out a bottle of white wine. She handed me the bottle and corkscrew. I went to work as she took out 2 carry-out trays from Rusty's. Diana asked, "Do you enjoy the pie?" Lucia asked, practically daring me to deny it. "I love the pie," I responded cheerfully, "thanking you for lunch." That gave me a big smile. I worked on the cork while Lucia unwrapped the sandwiches. They were chicken salad, and I could tell it was freshly prepared. I was hungrier than I realized. The cork popped free, and I felt proud. I didn't drop any when struggling to get it out. I filled the 2 plastic glasses and gently retreated. The cork was in the bottle before I set it down. "I'm sorry for yelling at you," Lucia replied, her gaze drawn away from me to the picnic setting. I was confused and didn't know what to say, so it just spilled out. I yelled back, "So we are even." I responded, attempting to smooth the waters. I was never really good at smoothing. She took my words well and looked at me with a more comfortable expression. "Mama advised me not to come out here and pretend I won the lotto." Lucia continued. "Mama, I loved how she said it." Her accent was quite minor, but it became more noticeable when she used that term. I tried to stop myself, but couldn't. I was furious at myself because I didn't know what to say when I arrived here. You gave me all that money and tried to convince me it didn't matter. I simply got a bit nuts. I didn't want to discuss the money again. It was finished in my mind. I hoped she'd let it go. "You tell your mother everything?" I inquired as I took a bite out of the sandwich. "This is quite good," I added coldly while chewing. I received another smile. Lucia gave a huge smile. One of those bright smiles. "Mama and I are close," Lucia responded. I could see the truth in her eyes. "It is only the 3 of us. And now that Sophia is gone at school, we're even closer. She wants me to stop dancing now. After what you did, I could tell she was stressed. I had offered her options, and she was not prepared to make them. At least she wasn't trying to return the money." "I agree with your mama," I said. The wine was sweeter than I typically prefer, but it went well with the sandwich and vegetables. It would also make an excellent preface for the pie. "I've never really done anything else," Lucia explained. She ignored the food. "I believe the lunch was created specifically for me. I don't even know how to repay you." I nearly choked on my final bite. I swallowed hard. "The main point is that you don't repay me." I spoke with as much compassion as I could muster. "You'll ruin the fun if you attempt." I knew what was coming, and I didn't have a ready response. The truth would elicit sympathy. I needed a nice lie. "Why are you doing this for me?" Lucia asked. I could see the concern in her eyes. "Look, I'm stinking rich, but I can't spend it all, Dot, even if I wanted to. Half-truths were preferable to outright lies. I don't actually have a family. I'd rather you and Sophia live a better life. Then let the government take everything in the end." "Are you really so rich?" Lucia asked. She was trying to justify everything in her head. "This year has seen a huge windfall. It allowed me to quit my career and remodel this house." I said this while spreading my hands wide apart to emphasize the large part. I'd have made a lousy Rockefeller. I couldn't even hand out money without upsetting others. Lucia simply nodded her head. I do not think she has totally accepted it yet. She gazed at the house, which was still decaying. "Is this what you prefer to do?" Lucia asked, indicating toward the home. "It's my only dream, I admit. It was actually my only realistic dream. Space exploration was still some years away." "I can paint," Lucia offered. Her gaze was fixed on me when she made the statement. The next notion that occurred to me was extremely foolish. In my defense, my next statement was the epitome of ignorance. Her eyes were quite attractive. "For $25 per hour, you can forget about the loan," I stated strongly. "Done," Lucia responded with one of her large smiles. I knew this would bite me in the buttocks later, and it would require a large chunk of skin. But now she'd made me happy. Third time. "I've never worked for a rich man. Do I need an evening gown to paint?" she inquired with a heavy dose of smart ass. I laughed. "You don't care about your jeans and t-shirt," I responded. Lucia began eating her sandwich while I finished with my second half. The remainder of the lunch went smoothly. We talked about pointless topics like how long the weather will last and other places to eat besides Rusty's. I took her on a tour of the house, explaining my concept for each room. She was quite enthused about the project and suggested many ideas that made sense to me. Never have I shared a dream with someone who agreed with it. It improved the dream and made it more attainable. "I need to inform Maddie that I have resigned and will return tomorrow at 8:00 Lucia murmured as she packed the remainder of her food into the basket. "Tomorrow is Sunday," I explained, thinking she could need the day. "Oh," Lucia realized. "We have an invitation to dinner tomorrow, so we must finish by 5:00. She began to walk toward her supper pickup location. I inquired, desperate for clarification. "Yep." With my mother and me, Lucia turned and walked backward while speaking. "It is not negotiable, so don't try to back out of it. I understand you don't have any plans." I questioned who was in charge of this initiative. She turned around and practically skipped back to her truck. "See you tomorrow," I called as Lucia disappeared into the cab. For the time being, hiring Lucia was the best choice I could have made. I clutched at the prospect of completing the house quickly and moving on before the inevitable happened. I could be that lucky. I looked to the front of the home. I concluded that now that I had another painter, spending the time going over the manual sanding with the power sander made perfect sense. I spent the afternoon doing exactly that. It made no sense to have an uneven work. Lucia arrived shortly before 8:00. She was quite joyful. She wore baggy white denim painter pants and an old worn gray t-shirt. Her hair was once more wrapped tightly behind her head. This time it was tied in a ponytail and topped with a scarf. I was barely awake when she entered. I had overslept and was relieved when she decided to prepare coffee. First, that fortunate electricity had paid off again. I had to admit that she filled out a pair of painter pants rather nicely. "Where do we start?" Lucia inquired with far too much enthusiasm in her voice. She was much more appealing to look at than the dreary walls. I had to smile when I saw her wild enthusiasm outside. I responded, "I need to have it done before the winter weather sets in. I bought some exterior primer and got it tinted as near to the final light brown as I could. I planned to use only 2 coats, 1 priming and 1 final. I felt we could start on one side and work our way to the front. After we had established a decent pattern, it just took us a half hour to get the equipment ready to begin painting. When Lucia bent down, I had to turn away. She certainly made those jeans seem nice. I used the ladder, and she always started on the ground as I reached down to dip my brush. I had a nice view of her taking long strokes over the horizontal wooden slats. I had painted the entire side. I wasn't sure if I should be enjoying painting this much. We take a step back and admire our work. Lucia pointed out that you had missed a few areas. Sure enough, I did. Damn. I'm curious as to how that transpired, I inquired as I examined the obvious locations. From this vantage point, you spent the majority of your time staring at my pets, Lucia stated with a huge smile. Yes, they were quite distracting, I agreed. Knowing I wasn't as cunning as I believed, I hefted the ladder back to one of the locations. I thought I was being less apparent about it. I knew you liked them, so I left them free. Lucia spoke earnestly. I looked across at her and noticed the staleness on her face. You understand the debt and your payment. It does not imply that I struggled to find the appropriate words. It does not obligate. This is not a strip club. I understand. Lucia grinned. I like how you look. It pleases me. She grabbed a brush, dipped it, and began climbing the ladder. Hold the ladder, she said. I wasn't sure what to say about that. I suppose it was in the nature of a stripper to show off. When I looked up, she leaned in and began to touch up a place that I had missed. I could see well up her t-shirt to the bottom of her amazing globes. Truly gorgeous, I explained explicitly. Lucia just kept painting with exaggerated strokes. I assisted her down and smiled. I moved the ladder, and she repeated the process for my other mistake. The plumber is scheduled to arrive tomorrow, I murmured as Lucia fell again. I imagined she'd want to be more conservative. I knew I preferred her to be more humble. I still had unjustifiable jealousy. If you act properly with Mama, Lucia grinned. I will not tempt the plumber. Blackmail? I questioned. Are you turning to blackmail? What do you suppose I'd say to your mom? Just be courteous, Lucia reminded me nicely. I momentarily considered whether she would come up naked tomorrow if I was nasty to her mother. I grinned inwardly at my own ideas. We were able to prime the back of the home before deciding to call it a day. We were due to Lucia's mother's house at 6 o'clock, and we both needed to clean up. Lucia surprised me by packing a change of clothes and toiletries in her truck. We took turns sharing the one bathroom with its leaking shower. She wasn't as accustomed to the lack of hot water as I was. It has a significant impact on the speed of your shower. Hopefully, that's one of the first things the plumber can fix. I was taken aback when Lucia walked out of the bathroom. Her raven hair flowed freely over her shoulders and onto a white blouse. She was dressed in a pleated white skirt that reached her ankles, laced with a brown woven hemp belt that was cocked lower on the right side. She was quite stunning to look at. Lucia joked, I used all of the hot water. I simply stared at her, transformed. She grinned when she saw Todd showering. She reminded me. I collected my drooling brain and took over the restroom. Even in the frigid water, I couldn't shake the image of her. I suspected I wasn't actually dating her, but meeting her mother was unsettling. I felt my emotions sliding toward her physically. I was aware of my attraction to her, but I believed I could emotionally distance myself from her. How do you stop something that you don't want to stop? The best I could do was khakis and a blue polo. It seemed a little simple against Lucia's lovely outfit, but she seemed happy. I made it a point to open the car door for her. There is something about a well-dressed woman that inspires you to be more manly. We men are all aware that we should open doors, but it had been a long time since I had raced to ensure that I did. She seemed to take it in stride. I was lectured along the way. Lucia, S. mother was not particularly religious, but using the Lord's name in vain was prohibited. Swearing in general was frowned on. Lucia had previously worked as a dancer, not a stripper, but she assured me that her mother was well aware of the pleasure palace. I was not to bring up Lucia's father, not even with Lucia, it seemed. For some reason, I was also instructed to avoid any issues related to Texas's annexation from Mexico in the 1800s. I quote M, guessing Mama had strong feelings about the matter after being fully briefed. We drove up in front of a little one-story home in what appeared to be a lovely family neighborhood. I hurried around the car to open Lucia's door. She waited calmly for me to do so and smiled as I did. I started to wonder if there was anything I wouldn't do to get that smile. I knew things were spiraling out of control, and I kicked myself for allowing it. Mama was waiting at the door. She was slightly shorter than Lucia, but had the same thick black hair. Mama carried a little more weight, but with dignity and elegance. She wore a flower dress with a white apron. God, assist me, Her smile mirrored her daughter's. The two hugged as if they had not seen each other in years. I almost felt forgotten until Lucia introduced me. "Mama, this is Todd Keystone." Lucia spoke my name joyfully. It felt uncomfortable to be presented in that manner. Lucia's tone seemed to convey a sense of permanence. "Hello?" I said, extending my hand. Mama grabbed my hand and pulled me in for a hug. I was astonished by how warm it was. It felt like we had known each other for years. I hugged back. "What else do you do when you are welcomed like that?" your Aunt Maria called. "She is on the phone in the bedroom." Mama spoke to Lucia with a heavy accent. "Go, Sarah.Todd, help me in the kitchen." Lucia unwillingly moved to the back of the home. Mama took my hand and led me into the kitchen. She turned to me with a serious expression on her face. "Why did you give Lucia money?" Mama asked. I could tell she was not angry yet. I stared back in the direction Lucia had taken, hoping she would come and save me. Maria, keep Lucia busy. "Why do we talk?" Mama persisted, knowing I was procrastinating. She appeared to need it. I responded without confidence. I attempted to do it anonymously. I was merely giving her additional options. I shrugged my shoulders, aware that it was a lame explanation. She pursued me down. I truly didn't intend to see her again. Mama was scanning my face with her eyes when I sensed she was hesitant to make a decision. I offered her the painting job. The whole thing sort of snowballed. To be honest, I was glad to help. Despite the difficult moments, Mama stared into my eyes. "I believe you." Mama reported that she reached up with both hands, brought my cheek to her lips, and kissed me. That quote S for stopping Lucia from dancing. She released me with a smile. I grinned back, sharing the enjoyable moment. She turned to the stove where several pots were steaming. She opened the lid of a saucepan and began stirring its contents with a wooden spoon. "How long does it take you to fix the house?" Mama inquired as she sampled the sauce and then added more spice. "I am not sure. Perhaps 4 months. With Lucia's assistance," I responded. I wish I knew where this was headed. "After that, you can leave," Mama asked. I cringed. This is the portion you had been ignoring. The portion one hoped would resolve itself, but I knew it couldn't. I was relieved she was studying the pots and not my face. "Yes," I responded, not wishing to elaborate. I didn't really have an option in the matter. "You leave my Lucia." Mama didn't hesitate to follow up. I could hear the concern in her voice. Her stance was tense. "Yes," I replied gently. For some reason, lying did not occur to me. Mama's shoulders slumped and she turned back to face me. "Lucia, nobody wants to see me dressed like this," Mama said, swinging her spoon at me. She never brought anybody to see me. My heart felt thick. Everything had already gotten out of control, and I hadn't seen it coming. "Did you inform her soon?" "Okay." The grief was overwhelming. "I will try," I responded with a whisper. I believe Mama sensed my grief in her face when she was puzzled. "Why would you leave if you felt that way?" Mama asked God. The woman could read my thinking. I had no response to give her. Nothing I'd like to share. I also couldn't lie. "I have to," I stated strongly. "It's not something I can control." Mama gave me an odd expression before her face firmed up. She thought about it for a bit before nodding her head to tell her niece. "No, Mama," muttered the spoon. "Still ready? Enjoy your own time." I could at least guarantee her that. I was about to comply when she came out of the kitchen and called down the hallway. "Lucia, inform her and call back. Do you have a guest here?" I suppose agreement was a foregone conclusion. The meal was a very pleasant occasion. Lucia was all smiles, and Mama appeared to enjoy seeing her happy. The cuisine was fantastic, a Mexican-influenced sausage mixture served with delicious brown rice. Mama seemed happy when I ate 3 helpings. I assumed I was being a pig. It's just that you don't know when you'll have meals like that again. I had to excuse myself after dessert to use the restroom. When I returned, his expression was radiant. They had evidently been discussing something, quite possibly me. I attempted to catch a hint from Mama's face, but it was unreadable. I let it go because neither party chose to include me in the debate. Mama hugged me away from Lucia as a good gesture when we departed. She whispered and kissed my cheeks. I nodded, proceeded to the car, and made sure to open the door for Lucia. I dug a deep hole. I understood that Lucia's smile was prompting me to go deeper. Lucia added brightly, "Mama likes you. She believes you are honest and a wonderful guy. I've already told her this, but she now believes me. I felt my gut churn over. I smiled at the compliment and searched for a new topic. Your mama can certainly cook. I chimed in with a little change of topic. That sausage was something else. I don't recall having anything like it before. What did Mama want to talk to you about? Lucia inquired curiously. I suppose the phone call didn't fool her. She was simply looking out for you. I squirmed away from the reality. Lucia smiled and accepted it at face value. So, did you like her? Lucia asked. Absolutely. She is lovely, I replied honestly. Lucia beamed, and I realized I had dug myself a little deeper. I believe I had just passed a critical milestone for Lucia. I stopped into my driveway nervously. Mama was correct. I had told Lucia I wasn't sure when, but she was far too eager to find out tonight, maybe after a day or two when the euphoria has subsided. I stepped out of the car and Lucy smiled, waiting for me to open the door. I of course did. She appeared fantastic and really alive. I wished things were different. Of course, if they were, I'd be in bed expecting to wake up to another week at my old, dreary work. She approached me as I closed the car door. I'd want to spend the night, Lucia remarked cheerfully. I really wanted to say yes, but it hurt. I considered how deep I was already and realized that her remaining was the worst decision ever. I only have a mattress on the floor and it's not that comfy, I said, hoping to deter her. I prayed that she would take the hint. I want to spend the night, Lucia repeated with a wicked smirk. I took a big breath and exhaled. She gently stroked her fingers along the side of my face. I am not really ready for a relationship, I stated weakly. Lucia widened her smile and kissed my lips. They felt as velvety as I remembered. Like an idiot, I kissed her back. Lucia muttered, just tonight. No commitment, only tonight. I succumbed as she kissed me again. I held her in my arms and let her false logic guide my thoughts. Once I let go, I was gone. The rest of the world vanished. And there was just this stunning woman and myself floating through time. Lucia grinned and grabbed my hand. We virtually rushed to the dining room, or where the dining room would be after the renovation was completed. Now it held my mattress and 2 luggage full of clothes. It was the only room with curtains. Lucia grabbed the few candles I hadn't lit since the power went out. She arranged them about the room, and I following, lighting them. We turned on the 60-watt ceiling light and the space took on a new life. Lucia unceremoniously began undressing. I followed suit, throwing off my shoes and raising my shirt above my head. She laughed and threw her broad. Me? I fell over while attempting to catch it and simultaneously taking my leg out of my jeans. I stopped undressing as our lips met and passion seized over. I rolled Lucy on her back and kissed her neck. I moved fast because she appeared to be in a rush. I raised my head with a proud smile. Lucia laughed and pushed her skirt down her legs. Absolutely lovely. Lucia and I exchanged compliments while drinking. Yes, Lucia whimpered. Her hands left my head, and she spread her legs wider apart. Her movements slowed for the first time since we left the automobile. Wonderful. Lucia sighed. I looked up and saw her smiling in the candlelight. All of her intensity slipped away. She moved me around her body and kissed me deeply. I like you more than you desire, Lucia added unexpectedly, her smile attempting to lighten the mood. I said nothing, which was an outright lie. She must have noticed the trauma on my face. Her smile faded, and she kissed me deeply as she moved me onto my back. It's fine, she whispered quietly as she mounted me. My climax was a slow blend of pain and passion. Lucia held me while I loathed myself for liking her. I woke up late the next day, much later than late. The sun was already high in the sky, and I could hear a drill in the basement. I hurriedly put on a pair of pants and a t-shirt, seeing Lucia had already left. I followed the noise down the creaking stairs to the basement. Lucia was delivering a copper pipe to a tall, slender guy in overalls. She grinned when she saw me coming down. Good morning, sleepyhead, Lucia called as the plumber freed her from the pipe. I smiled back half-heartedly. Tom wants to trench a new line from the main, she explained, pointing to the plumber. Someone appears to have run a tiny plastic line in a few years ago. Tom spoke while putting the copper through the hole he had just drilled. It is no longer code and will only cause issues in the future. I can dig a trench and lay a new one tomorrow. I don't believe we could acquire the new meter without doing that. Do it, I responded, nodding toward Lucia. She seemed like she was having fun. I was pleased to see that she had completely encased her jugs today. I took my phone out of my pocket and noticed that the time was 10:30. Shit. I attempted to wake you up, but you were extremely tired, Lucia remarked with a wink. The plumber did not see. I grinned, trying to get the comedy. Sleepiness was not meant to occur until later. I let it slip. Perhaps it would be like headaches, infrequent. We spent the day helping Tom. We were both interested in getting a hot water heater turned on as soon as possible. It turned out that Tom was an outstanding pick. His brother served as the county's water inspector. This ensured there would be few delays between installation and inspection. We opened some walls to run plumbing to the second story and replaced the existing pipes on the first floor. When we came to a halt, it was dark, and Tom withdrew, promising to return early the next morning with a backhoe. Lucia stayed the following night with me again. I hid the truth while sharing my passion. My hole was rather deep. There was no ladder long enough for me to climb out. I made no guarantees, but she extrapolated a lot from what I said, and I stopped trying to discourage her. On Friday, the pain in my head returned with a fury. I left that afternoon, lying to Lucia about needing to go to the bank. I instead visited the hospital. A hospice care facility with a counselor had been recommended to me. I was lost, and I needed to communicate with someone for the first time in my life. I needed to confide and seek advice, someone who comprehended at least some of what was going on. So she's not sure. Dr. Collins emphasized that his hair was a touch too dark and full for his age. I assumed he was a little vain. No, and I'm concerned my symptoms are worsening, I explained, attempting to give him the full picture. He looked down at the copy of my file that the previous doctor had sent. Consider what will happen if you don't wake up one day. Dr. Collins stated that she discovers you without knowing why. Imagine how she will react when she finds out. He took a time to let that sink in. You were dealt a bad hand, Todd. Fortunately, you have time to decide how you want to finish, but you are not allowing her to choose at all. I understand, yet I stammered. I need to know how to tell her. It aches to think about it. I wish there was an easier way. The doctor stated that we can do it for you if you ask. Although this rarely works out, I can assure you that there will be tears and fury. You must be blunt or she would assume you are joking. Nobody sees this coming. I closed my eyes, knowing I couldn't let this go any longer. I came here to strengthen my nerves. Experts had a way of defining what needed to be done. I didn't learn anything new, but I did get more determined to complete the task at hand. I had already messed up attempting to keep Lucia at arm's length. I now had to pay the price. It was going to be extremely pricey. Dr. Collins was showing me out the door, attempting to be encouraging. It was his job, and he was great at it. I am completed for the day. The doctor spoke cordially to the cleaning lady who was waiting outside the offices. I knew the replying voice right away, and I nearly vomited as she turned. I'd rather have died 5 minutes ago. Todd. What? Mama's eyes darted between Dr. Collins and me. I could not talk. I had no words. Dr. Collins quickly analyzed a portion of what was happening. Camilla, there are privacy issues here. The doctor explained clearly. I assumed I had put her employment at risk. Now I was screwing up an entire family. Is this something Juno can control? Mama yelled, ignoring the doctor and pointing at the hospice sign on the door. Her eyes were strained with a mixture of fury and terror. Camilla? We do not. I cut off the doctor. I was so deep that I could really pull the soil on top of me. Lucia's mother. I told the doctor discreetly. His eyes widened, and I noticed a mix of concern and compassion as he transferred his gaze between Mama and me. Use my office. The doctor wisely offered. He held the door open, and I entered, hoping Mama wouldn't follow. God did not respond, and I heard the door close painfully. I turned to face Mama. Tears were flowing down her face. She loves you, Mama choked. She knew she might not be able to stay, but she had no idea why. Mama choked back a sob. She thinks she changed your mind. This tore her heart away. Mama collapsed in front of me. I merely did what I could. I held her and tried to be strong. It was hopeless. I apologize. I gently apologized. I was not powerful enough to stop it. I continued putting it off, and things just got worse. I wish I never entered that club. Mama escaped from my arms. No, Mama spoke sternly. She doesn't dance anymore. It was fixed in Mama's thoughts, something that will never change. She didn't realize that Lady Money had done that. You never took it back. Mama wiped her eyes. She's better off, even if God calls you. She was nodding her head as she worked through the difficulty. She got up on her toes and kissed my cheek. You tell her today or I am. It was not a threat. A mother was shielding her child. I replied in the only manner I could. Yes, Mama, I replied. My stomach was already flip-flopping in response to the task. Go, as Mama ordered. I have an office to clean, and cleaning helps me think more clearly. It was a terrible ride home, terribly brief, once at 14. My parents had left me home alone for the weekend. As a normal young man, I attempted to impress a girl by taking her on a trip in my mother's automobile. Inevitably, I smashed into the front quarter panel while attempting to park. There was no license, and I couldn't explain how I knew where they kept the keys. Until this day, I believed waiting for them to return home was the worst moment of my life. I could tell the episode was going to be easy. Lucia hummed to herself while repairing the plaster in what would become the family room. We worked from room to room, correcting the damage caused by the new wiring and plumbing. I hated how happy she was. I was exhaling heavily as I entered the room. My pulse was racing. Have fun at the bank, Lucia asked innocently. The lies were told, only anguish remained. I lied. I did not go to the bank, I responded, attempting to remain calm and composed. I thought I would vomit. Lucia halted in her pasting for a moment, without looking at me. Lucia replied after a second. She returned to her repairs. I could tell she wasn't sure she wanted to hear more. I suppose I wasn't as cool and collected as I imagined. I saw your mother at the hospital, I said, moving forward. I was stalling again, and I despised myself for it. Did you pay Mama a visit? Lucia asked. She was still not looking at me, and the plastering was becoming quicker and sloppier. I sucked it up, and it came out. I have a tumor. I spoke bluntly. I'd known for a time. It is incurable. 6 months, perhaps a year. I no longer wished to vomit. I wanted to shoot myself. Lucia kept pasting without looking at me. She was covering up what had already been done. Lucia, I pleaded. When Lucia turned, I thought I was going to die. Tears were running down her cheeks. She bolted, dropping her trowel and mud pan. I didn't have the heart to pursue after hearing her pickup start and leave at high speed. I closed my eyes and prayed she would make it safely to Mama. I no longer want the house or my 6 months. I called Mama. She departed. I replied quickly. I don't think she'll come back. I apologize, Todd, Mama said. I am terribly sorry. I understood what she meant. She apologized for everything I had just lost. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I was back to not knowing anyone. I could always pay Dr. Collins for an additional hour. I could talk end of life for $100 an hour. Screw me. I yelled at the world. I returned to a dream that I no longer cared about. At the very least, it had an end game. Tasks that required action are preferable to doing nothing. I took up the trowel and mud pan and got to work. I didn't sleep that night, but the rooms had been renovated. My heart ached when the sun came up. I packed the plaster and cleaned the equipment. Everywhere I went in my house, I kept expecting to see Lucia humming along. I diverted myself by calling a window company. The leech arrived at the residence 2 hours later. I had a friend until I gave him the check. It was terrible how I hesitated and lingered over models and amounts. I chose the wood-framed, double-hung windows. What did I care about? Long-term maintenance. They looked the nicest and complemented the charm of the house. My new friend Frank went about measuring. He agreed to replace all but the bathroom windows on Monday. The bathroom windows were unusually shaped and required special milling. I handed Frank my check and said goodbye to my new friend. I spent my day painting the porch. I decided it was Lucius's proposal. The uprights need a lighter hue than the rest of the exterior. When I was finished, I realized I had brought even more of her into the house. She was correct. More character and charm. God, I missed her. I spent Sunday tearing up the old kitchen floor. Someone has long ago put some form of yellowed linoleum with enormous amounts of adhesive. I ended up replacing the plywood flooring. Strangely, I was unable to match the thickness of the old boards. Therefore, none could be saved. I placed the tile sample that Lucia had chosen on the floor. I measured the floor and planned to pick up the tiles on Tuesday. Lucia would also own the kitchen. I slept that night. The thumping awakened me the next morning. I checked my phone. It was almost 10 o'clock. Damn, I'd overslept again. I realized the window installers must be agitated. I hurriedly got dressed and went to the door. I was shocked to find them already inside the house. One worker was beating on a shim to verify the level, while another was hoisting another window into place. I assumed I must have left the door unlocked. The workers nodded at me, but largely disregarded my perplexed expression. I walked out the door, looking for the supervisor, Dot. The supervisor was at the rear of his truck, arguing with the most beautiful sight in the world. I stared startled as Lucia denied 2 of the windows. The seals had already been damaged, and there was no way they were entering the house. I watched as the supervisor relented and put them back on the truck, promising new ones when the bathroom windows arrived at the end of the week. Lucia noticed me standing on her doorstep. Her expression was inquiring. I smiled, and the world brightened with hers. She strolled up to me while I stood blankly, trying to figure out why she was here. "I want the year," Lucia stated. I closed the gap and drew her to me. "It's already yours," I explained, Dot. We kissed under a torrent of whistles from the installers. They'd never comprehend what Lucia gave me. Her heart was more important than 100 homes and a whole life. She was my happiness, and I hoped I could be hers. "I need to talk to Dr. Collins," Lucia whispered quietly, brushing her fingers through my hair. I adored her touch. I enjoyed just having her here. "He will not speak to me without your consent. I will tell you whatever you want to know," I replied hesitantly. I wasn't thrilled with the concept, but I couldn't hide anything longer. She smiled at me. I'd jump from a cliff for that smile. I need to know everything, including the terrible parts. "You will not tell me?" Lucia spoke cautiously. I felt like the supervisor was reinstalling the windows on the truck. It was a one-sided negotiation, and the only way to win was to yield, I admitted. I sat down on the steps and called Dr. Collins's office. Lucia was a designer who used to be a stripper. She had a strong sense of style. If I had my way, I would have painted the entire inside in a neutral color. I remembered that first night in the Pleasure Palace, when I only wanted one thing, and she gradually transformed it into what I truly needed. Why wasn't this woman leading armies of thralls? I had no idea. I simply followed her around the house while she selected colors. I nodded in accord, jotting down her ideas and pasting small paper paint swatches to the text, Dot. There was little doubt that she would own every room. That night, Lucia gave in to me. I made love to her at my own pace and in the way I desired, and she thoroughly liked it. I was slow and methodical, memorizing every inch of her through touch. Her odors, sounds, passion, and beautiful grin were mine. I completely lost myself that night. She and I were one, and we became everything. Surprisingly, I awoke before Lucia the following morning. I watched her sleep, her thick hair bunched up in weird directions. It was extremely peaceful to watch her chest softly rise and fall with each breath. I was guilty of letting her see me die. It was very selfish. She was the love of my short existence. I slipped softly out of bed, attempting to let her sleep. I dressed quietly and went to the kitchen. I took the coffee carafe and filled it with water from the restroom. I absolutely needed cabinetry and a sink in the kitchen. I smiled to myself as I turned on the coffee machine on the plywood floor. There was still so much to be done, and I didn't care whether it was ever finished. The process was more essential than the outcome. I never wanted it finished while Lucia was here. I like working with her, and finishing would be the end of that. I wanted what we had now to last forever. I was so incredibly selfish. "That smells great." A tired voice spoke through the doorway. I looked up from my position on the unfinished floor. Lucia was leaning on the doorframe. The feeble morning sun had barely broken through the window to her left. Her hair was a complete mess, and her grin was slight. "You are very stunning." I admired Lucia's t-shirt, which ended about mid-thigh and accentuated her nude legs. She grinned and sat cross-legged next to me while I poured her a cup of coffee. She exchanged her phone for a cup. Mama sent a text. "Dinner starts at 6 p.m., no lateness, a dinner invitation." I left a remark. "A summons," Lucia corrected with some laughing. "I'd love to. I said enthusiastically. Lucia leaned forwards, rat's nest and everything, and kissed me. Mama meant everything to Lucia, so she was extremely important to me. I wondered how my life might have changed if my parents hadn't died so young, or if I had married and started a family of my own. I threw the concept aside. Lucia was my now and forever. We spent our day shopping. We purchased tile, adhesive, grout tools, and several gallons of paint. We made arrangements with a cabinet firm to come out the next day to measure the kitchen and bathrooms. Lucia was keeping everything straight in her brain. Under all that hair, there was a brilliantly efficient intellect. I told her this, and she flushed and playfully urged me to shut up. She had no idea she had such good organizational skills. I believe she thrived off of my confidence and continued imagining it was all my fault in the midst of our buying frenzy. Lucy's phone rang. It was Sophia, and Lucia's face brightened as she sat on a seat outside a home store. I grinned as I noticed Lucia's attention shift to the phone. I leaned down, kissed her forehead, and told her to meet me inside the store. When she was finished, Lucia acknowledged me with a smile and a gesture of her hand. Regardless of how much we cared for one another, I would always come second to her daughter. I could live and die with that. I was in the lighting aisle attempting to select ceiling fixtures when Lucia returned with a spring in her step. I don't think she realized she'd been on the phone for more than 45 minutes. What are your thoughts? For the entrance hall, I inquired, holding up an encased glass fixture with bronze trim. Lucia looked for a time, and I could almost see her mind trying to picture it in the small entryway. Lucia considered whether an indirect approach would be preferable. It would be warmer and friendlier. She was correct, of course. Something without visible bulbs would be preferable. We took some time selecting a light for the entryway and 2 exteriors for the porch. She preferred to buy elsewhere for the remaining rooms because nothing stood out as great. I haven't informed Sophia about you yet, Lucia confessed, as we waited in line to check out Dot. She was leaning toward me comfortably. I thought about it for a bit. I pondered why this didn't concern me. Sophia would only see me as a blip, a hello followed by a farewell. You should not, I stated after a brief pause. She has plenty to worry about in life. The only thing I could give Sophia was sorrow, and even wrath if she resented my selfishness with her mother Dot. It was best for her and Lucia if we didn't meet. Will it not bother you? Lucia inquired with concern. She almost appeared to be the one with the shortest lifespan. I grinned at her, enjoying the balancing act. Sophia on one side and me on the other. She would feel nothing except misery. I spoke cautiously. I never want to be the cause of that Dot. I quote, "Ve already been too selfish with you." Lucia welled up and gripped me tightly, nearly knocking me into a battery display. I love you, Lucia muttered. It ached to hear her say that. I knew that already, but having it out in the open felt both joyful and chastising. I'd linked her to my demise. I was going to give her a lot of agony, and I was too weak to let her go. I needed her more than the house. I needed her for more than another 50 years. I also love you, I muttered back, but the cashier's cough interrupted our kiss. We were holding up the line. The hot water heater was mankind's greatest innovation. It allowed me to stay in the shower with Lucia. Washing her was an amazing pleasure. I spent time washing her hair, which she really appreciated. The encounter had her tightly wound up, and she pushed me to lie down in the tub while giggling. It was slippery, uncomfortable, and absolutely fantastic. She lowered herself onto me. It was deliciously slow, her grinding into me as warm water touched us both. I was her prisoner. Caught between the tub's edges and unable to move Dot, she appeared to like having control, and taunted me while doing so. I followed her to the clouds in seconds after her tremors triggered me. I made a mental point to replace the old bathtub with a larger one. Mama was waiting at the door when we arrived. We had to park on the street because there were 2 cars already in the driveway. I knew which one belonged to Dr. Collins. Lucia had said he'd be here. I understood why, and I did not hold it against her. I couldn't stop this, and I knew it was necessary. Mama smiled as she embraced me. I felt her affection as she hugged me and told me she was delighted I was here. It astonished me given what I was doing to her daughter. I expected a colder reception. I reciprocated in kind, which appeared to pleasure Mother and her daughter, which in turn pleased me. I was not used to that kind of greeting. It appeared foreign in some way. Once inside, I noticed Dr. Collins and what appeared to be a colleague of his. Are you patting the bill, doctor? Lee smiled as I inquired. Dr. Collins laughed as he rose. We shook hands. This is Dr. Pierce, a neurologist. Collins brought me to a 30-something doctor dressed in jeans and a polo. All of it. Designer Camilla has offered a trade. Collins smiled. Dinner in exchange for a consultation. Pierce smiled and nodded to Mama, saying, The director told us to be here. Mama smiled as she stated, I have a lot of power. I guessed that working for the same firm for 30 years results in benefits that the average employee does not receive. Mama's dinner was just as delicious as the last time she made steak drizzled with a beautifully spicy cheese topping, served with julienne potatoes and mildly seasoned steamed broccoli. I would have ordered thirds again, but someone had summoned 2 hungry doctors. I felt a little envious when Mama served them seconds. I was selfish in that way. Over coffee. The inevitable talk started. I'd heard it all before and was not looking forward to hearing it again. Dr. Collins was the first to notice my hesitancy. He was, of course, used to such chats. Can we take this into the front room? Collins inquired, glancing at Mama Dot. She looked at me and nodded. Lucia had a perplexed expression on her face. I have heard it before. I spoke quietly to Lucia. We'll discuss after she noticed my concern and kissed me on the cheek. Everyone save Mama took up their coffees and went to the front room. Do you know how to do the dishes? Mama asked. She knew enough to distract me from the discourse. I stood and began collecting plates. Of course, I responded with a smile. Mama proceeded to set up the sink while I gathered the plates and cutlery. Mama told me she needed to know and handed me a freshly scrubbed plate to dry. I ran a towel across the base and around the rim. I understand, I answered. It's simply not a fun conversation. Mama nodded and handed me another bowl. We will be there when God calls. Mama plainly said the word. We hit hard. I've dragged 2 people into my personal cesspool. I didn't mean to trick her into this. I gazed at her as she dipped another plate into the washing water. I did not. Mama cut me off with her hand. Lucia made her decision. Mother clarified. Dot, do you have a family now? I attempted to say something, but nothing came out. I just stared at her, bewildered. This was not my decision to make. It never was. I had dug a hole too deep. Lucia, love you. Is she not dancing? I see dreams and eyes. Mama was tearing up. I'm sorry, but I can't help what God does. She shrugged her shoulders helplessly. I know we want you here. I stood there like an idiot looking at her. How could she have thought I was anything but a problem? The house thing. Mama continued speaking with her hands. Is that all she talks about? How did you both do this and that? How'd you go about building something? She has not thought in that way since Sophia was born. Dot, is she now happy to do that? Mama grasped my arms with wet hands. She needs you, even if only for a short period of time. I believe you need Lucia as well. I wrapped my arms around her. More than you'll ever know, I whispered. I had just considered how horrible I felt for Lucia. I didn't know her previously and wanted to see how she had changed. Dot, it will be difficult later, I reminded Mama. Do you adore Lucia? The family dealt with what Mama said and went back to the dishes after wiping her eyes. That's what families do, she added. Looking at Lucia's mother, I realized there were things I could do to make sure Lucia had options. A future of her choice beyond the temporary me. I would never see $1 from Social Security, but Lucia may. I grinned as I mentally calculated the unspent amounts of my 401k, the value of the house, the stock in the brokerage firm, and the cash in the bank all added up to a substantial sum. There's no purpose in meeting a cousin I hadn't seen in 20 years. I get it. Lucia needs to marry me, I replied, smiling. Mama smiled slyly up at me. She had thought the same thing as anybody else. I would have suspected something nefarious about Mama. It was calculated love, an obvious solution for Lucia's path. Mama's damp hands clasped my face and kissed my lips. Dot, do you make great things, son? Mama spoke with sincerity. You're a good mommy. I spoke conspiratorially. Mama smiled when we returned to the dishes. It's funny how a few thoughts may alter one's mood. I went from dread to pleasure in a couple of moments. I always knew I was going to give Lucia the house. I was merely sluggish to notice the rest. Suddenly, comma money had value again. I was putting up the last of the dishes while Mama told me stories about young Lucia. I received a picture of a pretty crazy girl with minimal fear. She must have been terrifying to raise. But Mama recalled those moments warmly. I guess that was the spark Mama noticed now. Fearlessness in the knowledge that you are correct. Lucia had effectively taken over the rehab, at least in spirit. Her decisions were now guiding the project and establishing a time frame. Mama got her kid back. I was going to make sure Mama could keep her. I was laughing at one of the stories when Lucia walked into the kitchen. She glanced at Mama and muttered something unspoken. Mama simply stood up, kissed her, and left the room. Lucia straddled me on the chair, her arms around my neck. "You will not fight it?" Lucia asked. The doctors must have warned her about the risky therapies. I had to drop such thoughts soon. The odds were lottery-sized, and I would spend the most of my time sick in a hospital bed, not how I envisioned the conclusion of life. "No," I replied simply. "Dr. Pierce agrees with you," Lucia said as her eyes became hazy. "The headache scares me. They claimed it'd be painful. I couldn't really help her with it." "I'll get through this. I have to," I replied simply. "We will get through this," Lucia reiterated, "because we need to." She leaned in close to my ear, whispering, "Dr. Pierce seems to believe sex may help." Whatever. Dr. Pierce charged for his services, but it wasn't quite enough. He didn't. I smiled. I asked, and he said it wouldn't hurt. Lucia said with a $1,000,000 smile. Her expression became serious again. "It's better to know. Thank you for informing me." I kissed her, then she was correct. It was better. There would be no surprises, nothing I had to desperately strive to conceal. The Harvest Festival was placed that weekend. I had never gone to one. And because Diana had convinced me to go, I brought Lucia along. She was hesitant. Her experience with the town was influenced by her high school pregnancy and past job. She had been avoiding events like the festival since high school, having witnessed Lucia deal with contractors. You'd never guess she had a self-conscious bone in her body. Here at the festival, she was continuously altering her skirt and hair. Lucia, a red-headed woman with far too many freckles, called out. She waved from within a funnel cake booth. Lucia, S-cheeks, flushed scarlet, and she waved back with a feeble smile. "Who is that?" I asked Kathy. "We were pals in high school," Lucia replied hurriedly, attempting to deflect me away. I paused in my tracks. "So introduce me." I smiled. This woman was eager to watch me die because she was terrified of the past. Lucia was concerned about the request. She glanced up at me with desperate eyes. Things became humiliating once Sophia was born. Lucia whispered, "Most of my friends have dropped out. I truly don't want to relive it." I massaged her hand and simply nodded my head. I didn't have the heart to have her attack those devils. This demon believed otherwise. Aren't you going to say hello? Kathy had sneaked up behind us. Her questions sounded sorrowful. Lucia turned and attempted to stutter an apology. They exchanged glances for a time before Kathy burst into tears and held Lucia. Lucia followed suit, and I was now the third wheel. A sequence of half-sentences followed, which appeared incoherent but were obviously apparent to both of them. "Come on, Lou, we're short-handed," Kathy remarked, dragging Lucia along. "We can converse while working." I followed behind a jubilant Lucia who had forgotten I existed. By the time we arrived at the booth, the topic of children had come up, and everyone's jaws were moving like crazy. Kathy gave Lucia a children's charity apron, and she began working the booth without thinking. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to see a well-groomed man, likewise wearing an apron and metal glasses, beaming at me. He reached out his hand. "Bob," he spoke rapidly. "It appears that you have been selected to Todd." I responded and shook his hand. He handed me an apron and showed me how to fry funnel cakes properly. Bob was Kathy's spouse. They had 2 children, one of whom was just starting high school, a home in town, and a modest accounting practice. I learned half of the material from Bob and the other half via Kathy and Lucia's incessant chat. People they both knew stopped by the booth to reminisce about old times, professors they had tortured, and fun they had. Lucia was beaming. Mama walked past the booth, undetected by the chattering Lucia. She approached the fryer and smiled at me. "Do you see that?" Mama expressed her pride in what you do for her. I smiled back, looking at Lucia, who was in her own personal heaven. I flipped over the current cake I was working on and peered back. Mama was gone. I suppose she knew better than to stick around. There was always something to do at a charity booth. The entire town seemed to pass by the booth. Lucia's undeserved shame vanished that afternoon. It was a small town, and everyone knew each other's dirty laundry. Getting pregnant in high school 20 years ago was no longer considered a horrible thing. In reality, the majority of the crowd was curious about Sophia's plans. Fortunately, it was Lucia's favorite topic. It was the most Lucia had laughed since I'd known her. It was almost dinner time when we were relieved by other volunteers. Lucia finally introduced me to Kathy, who was a great hugger. We all promised to meet again in the future and parted ways amicably, with Bob's heartfelt gratitude for our assistance. Lucia was no longer bothered about her skirt or whether her hair was tangled. I loved seeing her with a permanent smile, nodding to passers-by and exchanging hellos. Now others could see her in the same way I did. "Where would you want to eat?" Lucia inquired, turning to me. I grinned and shrugged my shoulders. Lucia lost her smile. "How long?" she inquired sympathetically. I didn't believe my headache was as noticeable. "Not long." I lied. "It began around 2 hours ago and has grown in severity. There was nothing I couldn't manage. It's certainly not worth disrupting Lucia's joy." "Keys," Lucia instructed, reaching out her hand. "Come on, we are having fun." I smiled, attempting to hide the headache. Lucia simply flexed her fingers, still wanting the keys. I groaned, handed them to her, and we walked to the car. Lucia had me put my head in her lap while she drove. She placed one warm palm over my eyes to help obscure the brightness. It was incredibly calming and relieved the ache. She spoke slowly, telling me about all the people she had encountered and how they related to her past. Her voice was always barely audible. It never irritated my headache and was relaxing to listen to. She didn't say anything that demanded a response. I just had to lie there and attempt to relax my mind. The hideous drapes Lucia had hung in her bedroom suddenly made sense. She closed them late in the day. The sun was completely hidden out. The room transformed into a pleasant darkness. She'd been preparing for this. She pulled aside the blankets and asked me to lie down on the cool sheets. She took off my shoes, then hers, and slept next to me. You don't comprehend how powerful love is until someone offers you everything she has. We just hugged each other for hours, as my brain protested. Lucia did not fuss or cry. She was merely there with me to ensure that I was not alone and that everything was peaceful. Love does not always require action. We spent the following day tiling the kitchen floor. We had seen YouTube instructions and read a few store booklets. We resolved the issue over whether to place the cabinets directly on the plywood or on top of the tile. Cabinet companies appear to prefer the first option, whereas tile layers typically chose the latter. We chose the latter because it involved less tile cutting. It also meant that the floor needed to be exceedingly level, because shipping the cabinets on top of tile would be inefficient. All the films and reading in the world could not have prepared us for what we had done. There is a reason why professionals get paid highly to lay tile. No one ever informed us to expect crooked walls. It appeared that the corner was 90 degrees. You were right to assume it was 90 degrees, but it wasn't. The corner wasn't quite perfect. We made the error of placing tile on the short wall first. We understood this would cause the inaccuracy to continue along the entire length of the wall, making the tiles appear wonky. We ended up taking out the first run of tiles. Lucia handled it well and rallied throughout the afternoon. I was more irritated with the mistake and the time we had lost, but a few kisses and some lighthearted teasing got me back on track. And she looked great. I've been overwearing those jeans. We were finishing up the area that would be covered by the new cabinets. I asked Lucia to marry me. It didn't make sense to be all sentimental about it. If not for time restrictions, I would have waited months and spent days planning before asking, "I want us to marry." I said it in a conversational tone, which sounded absurd, more like a commercial partnership than a proposition. It was not even a question. "What for?" Lucia inquired as she leaned on a newly installed tile to apply the glue. "You do not require a piece of paper. I am not going anywhere, Todd." She, of course, misinterpreted my poor intentions. She was not angry. It seemed like a waste of time to her. I was already on my knees when I tried to rephrase. Lucia, will you marry me? I asked with seriousness. She glanced over and chuckled. It was not an insulting chuckle. She'd assumed I was joking. Her humor faded as she noticed my look remained unchanged. Todd, are you frightened I'll abandon you? Lucia inquired with anxiety in her voice. After last night, that was the last thing from my thoughts. I had clearly mishandled the delivery. I'm worried about leaving you, I informed her. I want to leave you with this. I motioned toward the home. I can give you options. I can kind of be afterwards. I let it go, unable to state the obvious. I can acknowledge that to myself, but I still have difficulty expressing it aloud. Lucia's eyes become all watery. I'm here for you, not for this, Lucia said, holding out a tile. She was getting it all wrong. I've been thinking about how she felt insulted. I understand, I expressed clearly. I'm saying everything wrong. I am not attempting to buy what you have generously offered. I would not want it that way. I shook my head, unable to find the words. I closed my eyes and started again. If there was time, if I'd met you sooner, I envision ourselves as a family. You, myself, Sophia, and her siblings. I'd have had plans in place. I would never have left you impoverished. I opened my eyes and met hers. I want to be a part of your future in every way possible. Lucia choked up a little. How many kids? Lucia questioned with a sniffle. She had her own dreams. 3 or 4, including Sophia. I responded that my unachievable dreams were greedy. I noticed tears run down Lucia's cheek. She tackled me, smothering me with kisses and shedding a few tears. She felt great in my arms as I fought desperately not to disrupt the freshly laid tiles beneath me. It would have been such an amazing family. Lucia spoke. Marry me. Allow me to take care of my family, I whispered into her ear. Lucia nodded and held me more tightly. I felt something, the tile shifted, and I realized I didn't mind having to replace the entire kitchen. Lucia had answered yes. It took us a couple more hours to complete the tiles. Impending death has a way of shifting priorities. I took Lucia out to supper to commemorate the kitchen floor, not our upcoming nuptials. The marriage looked to be more of a legal formality. Which comma, I suppose, was, because a future existence together was simply not going to happen. I offered for Lucia's sake. Lucia agreed for my sake, and possibly for Sophia's. Love has a way of permeating our reasoning. How will I tell Mama? Lucia inquired after we had ordered. Rusty's was fairly busy, so I ordered my pie early. They had run out one night, and I was not about to let that happen again. Someone would have to be dissatisfied tonight. She has already given me her blessing. I responded. I was perched high on my seat, checking to see whether anyone was securing my pie from the glass display case. Diana hovered near the display but did not actively slice. You sought her permission? Lucia asked with a big smile. I replied. I pondered if it would be impolite to ask Diana for the slice just now. I ordered it, but she may have decided to wait until we had finished eating. I knew waiting was a risk because I'd already lost that gamble. Is heroin present in those things? Lucia asked. I replied, not really listening anymore. One of the other waitresses took out what might have been the last pie and cut a slice. I had to weigh the risk of shame versus the absence of pie. It's not like I've had a typical lifetime to eat pie. Every squandered opportunity was lost forever. I was ready to speak with Diana when Lucia abruptly stood up and went over to the display. She returned a little later, holding a whole pie and smiling. I was confident that my relief was obvious on my face. You sought her permission? Lucia inquired again, realizing she had just asked about Mama. Finally, it registered in my brain. I smiled with contrite eyes. I spoke with her about it after supper. When you were with the doctors, I responded appropriately. She said I'd make an excellent son. Lucia was grinning. How did you know I wanted pie? I asked. She leaned forward to kiss me. Lucia said, because I will make a wonderful wife. Do you talk to Mama? She repeated with an amazed, radiant smile. I assumed it was the correct thing to do. I had a happy fiancé and my own pie. Life was good. We got married a week later. It was a brief ceremony at the courthouse, presided over by a very obese judge. He was happy and seemed to enjoy marrying us. I think listening to people argue all day makes you grateful to deal with two parties that completely agree. He utilized pleasantly casual language but made us express our ideas. Mama, comma. Dr. Collins, Dr. Pierce, Bob, and Kathy Thompson all witnessed it. Bob and Kathy were made aware of the entire scenario, which I disliked discussing. My lawyer suggested that we have many disinterested witnesses to avoid legal challenges from long-lost relatives. Bob and Kathy needed a few minutes to get over their pity. They pledged to keep the secret so that the entire town would not become a pity party. Kathy cried briefly throughout the ceremony, prompting Lucia to do the same, followed by Mother. I was just grateful that they were happy tears. We gathered everyone at our house. During the week, we completed the kitchen and the downstairs bathroom. Mama, Kathy, and Lucia took over the kitchen, while the males arranged folding tables in the unpainted future dining room. I cracked open the beer, turned on some music, and we rejoiced. Dr. Pierce said he was a freeloader. He knew Mama would be cooking dinner, so he decided to accompany Dr. Collins. I smiled, fully comprehending life as a bachelor, having spent all but half the day as one. Bob exclaimed loudly that I needed a belated bachelor celebration. Too late. Lucia yelled in the kitchen. I giggled at her bullet-like reaction. Bob simply wants a cause to see strippers, Kathy chided loudly. I went silent, recognizing they probably had no idea how I met Lucia. I hoped Lucia didn't mind the comment. I wondered how Mama was handling it. That's how Todd met Lucia. Mama said I was surprised to hear it so clearly from the kitchen. The two doctors simply sipped their beers. They already knew. Bob's eyes widened as he peered at me. I offered him a half smile and shrugged my shoulders. She danced to get Sophia into college, Mama clarified proudly. I went to check on Lucia after not hearing anything from her. Lucia and Kathy were hugging when I arrived. I suppose it was a combination of pity, forgiveness, and love from both sides. I raised my beer to the dining room. Here's to mothers, I toast. And the youngsters they adore form a chorus here. This was returned. Lucia looked up and grinned. Mama stared at me and nodded. They've all taken their dirty laundry out, Mama stated. Life, go on. I had to admire her audacity. Lucia didn't have to conceal her history anymore. Kathy was clearly not holding it against her. Bob appeared impressed. I had married a stripper, and the two doctors received a free supper. Mama's timing was impeccable. The supper, of course, was fantastic. Mama and the ladies prepared thick chicken chimichangas topped with a spicy avocado mixture. This time I had thirds because they had made a lot. Mama had clearly missed her calling. I had no idea how Lucia maintained trim growing up with her mother's cuisine. I would have been extremely happy weighing 500 pounds. The physician spent around 15 minutes chanting Mama's praises. Mama simply smiled, soaking up the compliments. I do not feel any different. Lucia called from the bathroom after everyone had departed, stating that she was in no discomfort. After drinking my fair share of beer, I wondered whether I had made the marriage too functional. Are you sorry we didn't do the entire white dress thing? I asked. With time constraints and a desire to keep things hidden. It had not seemed prudent. I just didn't want her to regret it. Lucia replied, No. She rounded the corner with nothing but a smile. You quote DG, simply rip it from me anyway. My wife, standing at the doorway, was the most stunning nude angel this side of heaven. I rose up and moved over to kiss her. She laughed. Brush your teeth. Be your breath, Lucia murmured sweetly. Then return and make love to me as a decent husband. She slid her hand up my thigh to underscore her point. My wife, I am at your command. I laughed as I twirled into the restroom and hastily brushed the barley and hops from my mouth. I left my clothing neatly piled on the floor next to Lucia's and walked into the bedroom like a Greek god. I enjoyed the smile my strutting produced. I could see she was trying hard not to laugh. Come here, stud. Lucia called. She reached out her hand to try to speed up my absurd walk. I lay beside her and peered into her eyes. I'm happy I married you. I spoke truly. I brushed my hand through her hair, brushing it away from her face. And I you, Lucia responded. We kissed, softly and profoundly. Something was different. It was simply a silly piece of paper. But something was different. I rolled on top of my wife, kissing her neck and absent-mindedly fiddling with her jugs. Now I have jugs as well. She was mine, and I was hers. My movements were mild, like a swaying motion. I wanted our first marriage to last, and she did nothing to help it along. We remained connected, peering into one another's eyes without hesitation about how we felt. I felt her arms tighten around my neck as she drew me closer. I hugged her and stayed with her as she gently descended from the heavens. It was all incredibly sensual and intensely private, intense at another level. Something had changed. I don't feel the same. Lucia sighed. Better, different, she clarified while kissing me. You make a beautiful wife, I said, trying to regain my breath. That was much better than pie. Lucia laughed gently and we kissed some more. We kissed again and again. The weeks passed in a fog of euphoria. We spent our days finishing up the bathroom and its two new siblings. The tub was particularly large and we tested its breadth several times. My wife was amorous, and I capitalized on her desire when no deliveries or guests were expected. Lucia made an effort to be breathless. She teased me mercilessly, always bending over at the perfect angle. We spent our honeymoon installing hardwood flooring on the first floor. I was working hard on pounding in a stubborn slat when Lucia entered, dressed in a short skirt and knee pads. The skirt was cute, but it was entirely inappropriate for the task at hand. I gave her a questioning look. She just giggled and got to work. It took us 2 hours to return to the floor. The inevitable returned while we were painting the dining room. I was up on a ladder, attempting to carefully edge a light blue color along the wall without damaging the ceiling. I was inwardly proud of my steady hand, which no longer required a guide to shield the ceiling. The headache came on quickly, unlike the previous ones. It went from a dull ache to blinding pain in seconds. I stumbled down the ladder and landed on my backside. Cringing, I closed my eyes. It felt as if someone had driven a hot poker into my skull. Lucia arrived at my side almost immediately. She took away the paintbrush and made me stand. I have you, Lucia whispered. This was significantly worse than the previous one. I knew she saw it, even as I tried to open my eyes and alleviate her concerns. The light was blinding and burned into my brain. I had to close my eyes or stop standing. She led me upstairs to the dark sanctuary and placed me on the bed. My jaw hurt, so I realized I was grinding my teeth. I had expected pain, but not the agony I was experiencing now. You need the pills, Lucia said quietly. I could hear desperation in her voice. She was also hurt by this. I shook my head, not wanting my own voice to echo in my skull. I wasn't prepared to leave reality. The pain would subside. Please, she asked, and I shook my head again. I wrapped my hands around my ears, blocking out whatever sounds I could. My head was on fire. Lucia curled up beside me, silent. I could feel her heart racing too quickly. It was the first time I wanted her to leave me. I was able to bear my own pain, but I struggled with hers. Later on, time seemed to move strangely. I felt her rising. I was relieved when I heard the door quietly close and was left with only my boiling brain. She should be spared this. Everyone should be spared this. Lucia quietly returned later. The pain had not subsided, and I had failed to cope with it. It was not something I could ignore, although I continued to try. You have to eat. Dr. Pierce said it would ease the pain. Lucille lied, although I didn't know it then. It was oatmeal she handed me mixed with cinnamon. I ate with my eyes closed. Even the swallowing seemed to ignite the fire. I ate in desperation, hoping it would dull the sharp edges of the knife that seared into my skull. In time, it did. The pain began to fade, but my muscles went limp with it. I opened my eyes, lethargic, and saw my wife in tears. I am sorry, Lucia whimpered. I am sorry, she repeated as tears flowed down her cheeks. I knew then that I had just had my pills. I reached out to her, trying to comfort her, to tell her it was all right. My muscles didn't want to cooperate as my head slid lower into the cushion. The world took on a glossy tint with no detail. My wife and all her beauty appeared so far away. It's okay, I slurred. I closed my eyes because it took too much strength to hold them open. I could still feel the agony, but it was more like a recollection than anything too disconcerting. I faded to sleep. I awoke approximately a century later. My thoughts were cloudy, but the ache was gone. It would be back. Of that, I was confident. When I opened my eyes, Lucia was sleeping fitfully next to me. She was still in her painting clothes, and there were black rings around her attractive eyes. My muscles were mine again, although they still tried to fight back. I leaned over to kiss my wife's cheek. It shocked her awake. Is it gone? Lucia inquired with bloodshot eyes. I nodded and gave her a faint smile. I'm sorry I tricked you, she replied, her eyes watering. I couldn't watch it any longer. I touched her cheek, realizing how much suffering loving me could inflict. Are you in charge of the pills? I entirely submitted to Lucia. I will take them when you tell me to dot. The pain I saw in her face was more severe than the migraine. My wife arrived first. Reality came second. She kissed me gently, and we just laid there talking about nothing significant, simply enjoying being together. Another day. There were 3 things that pleased my wife. Sex. I spent time bonding with her mother and going shopping. Lucia enjoyed picking out furniture. The first floor was finished, and it was time to put guts into the newly designed skin. Her eyes were gleaming as we walked from store to store. She kept a notebook full of primary and secondary options while also controlling the money. My head was absolutely muddled with numerous options. Lucia grinned as she looked at her notes after we finished our shopping trip. I recognized the look. I'd seen it on the Discovery Channel, the exact expression a female lion gives when she comes to a halt with her victim. We go back through the stores and make careful purchases. I had no idea how it all came together, but I trusted her confidence and admired her excitement. By the end of the week, the first floor resembled a home. There were just 4 bedrooms left to do, and I was on medications every 4 days or so. Lucia had entirely moved into the home. We had one unfinished bedroom full of her eccentric furnishings from her previous apartment. Mama began to pay me visits on a regular basis, sitting with me when I awoke from a pill-induced sleep to see her maintaining watch. Lucia was keen to complete the house. It had once been my dream, and I didn't have the heart to tell her that she had replaced it. It made her very happy to labor toward the accomplishment of my aspirations, and I enjoy seeing her happy. I started sleeping longer. It bothered Lucia deeply. She understood what it meant, and I could see it in her eyes. My time was getting shorter. Mama had temporarily relocated to one of the spare rooms as soon as it was finished. She noticed the signals and was determined to see Lucia through. When Lucia was busy elsewhere, I spent several hours talking with Mama. We talked about my marriage, my end, and making certain it wasn't Lucia's end. I admired Mama's strength. I didn't really believe in God, but she sure did. She was adamant that I would go to paradise, which I found strangely reassuring despite the fact that I didn't believe it existed. I awakened one day, scarcely able to move my eyelids apart like anvils. My breathing was shallow, and I couldn't seem to inhale more air. I had difficulty concentrating on Mama, who sat on a chair by the bed. She rose swiftly when she noticed I was awake. She leaned down and kissed my forehead, and I felt a tear drop on my cheek. God, coming, my son, Mama stuttered. I get your wife. I knew that was the truth, and I was grateful to be spared any further anguish. My eyes wanted to close, but I used all of my might to keep them open. I wanted to see my wife once more. Lucia rushed in, covered in bright green paint splotches. She swiftly lay down beside me, and I could see the red in her eyes. Mama exited and closed the door. It's almost finished. Just another day, Lucia pleaded. When my eyes next closed, they would never open again. I gave the best smile I could. It's all right, I said softly. It's okay. I reiterated how things had changed since our initial meeting. Lucia hugged me and started crying. There was nothing I could do to relieve her anguish. I knew this day would come, and I had dug a very deep hole. I whispered, "Thank you for being my wife." She raised her tear-stained face to look me in the eyes. As my eyes closed, I was entranced by the angelic face. Her lips drew me into darkness. Spring weather was giving way to summer warmth. Lucia and her mother, Camilla, dressed conservatively and sat in the front row of the lawn. Hundreds of white folding chairs were neatly lined up and filled with well-dressed parents, grandparents, and friends. No one is more proud than Lucia. The stage was only a foot above the ground, providing just enough elevation to distinguish it from the beautiful grounds of the relatively modest university. The chancellor delivered a dry address about the past and the new future, as represented by the graduates about to be presented. His garments were showy, with long ribbons of different colors flowing down the front. Lucia had no idea what they meant, but smiled, assuming they might be self-installed. All of our alumni are stars in their own right. The Chancellor droned on, but one always stood out. With great pleasure, I introduce you to your valedictorian, Sophia Mendez. Lucia's face was filled with pride as her daughter took the podium. Camilla shook her daughter's hand and smiled as her grandchild took the podium dot. Sophia wore the same thick raven hair as her grandma and mother. The same grin was on her lips, but her eyes were more piercing, inherited from a father she would never see and never wanted to meet. Sophia gazed down from the stage and caught her mother's eye. She smiled, and her mother returned her affection. Sophia's mother had spoken with her last night. Sophia had observed her mother's transformation and watched her new property management firm thrive from a distance. She sensed an underlying grief and learned portions of the story her mother hesitated to disclose. Last night, she learned everything and cried. She cried because she had never met Todd, the guy who provided for her mother's future while also securing her own dot. She largely mourned for her mother since the affection she found had vanished too quickly. Sophia's speech was usual for valedictorians. It discussed accomplishments and goals. It was filled with amusing anecdotes. Only the graduate appeared to comprehend and appreciate. It was well appreciated and not too long. Lucia and Camilla were on the edge of their chairs attempting to capture the moment. Sophia eventually moved on to thank the school faculty and everyone else who helped make it possible. My pals. Sophia paused. We cannot forget our friends who made this adventure possible and pleasurable. I thank everyone, especially you, Tammy. She ran her hand over the black-cloaked graduates seated on the left side. Our families. She halted again to gaze at her mother and grandparents. Thank you, Grandmama. As Sophia's eyes met her own, Lucia felt a tear trickle down her cheek. Thank you, Mama. Sophia tossed her written speech aside, and her eyes watered. She tried incredibly hard not to let it show in her voice. I also need to thank my father. Sophia spoke gently. Lucy. His tears fell freely. Not my biological father, who abandoned my mother to raise me alone. I quote M talking about the man who adored my mother and rekindled her hopes. The one who assured me that I could attain my goals. The person I will never meet because God took him before I could. Sophia's voice cracked as she gazed up at the lovely sky. Thank you, Dad. Sophia exited the podium before emotions overpowered her, just as they did her mother. The audience applauded, and the grads cheered. Both did, since the grief. Lucia tried and failed to hold herself together. Too many feelings. Pride, loss, and love washed over her in waves. I simply wish I had finished the house in time, Lucia whimpered. She really regretted not realizing Todd's desire while he was still alive. Telling Sophia helped, but the agony was still present. 2 years had only just begun to soften it. Camilla simply smiled at her daughter and pulled her close. Does Tino care about the house? Camilla spoke gently. He had a dream about mending Jew. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened.